Thank you very much, Troy, and thank you very much for starting this wonderful meeting of the regular session of the West Ada School Board. To start, as is our custom, we will begin by reciting the Pledge of Allegiance, and we will do that with our mute on, and we will start now. Yeah, well, thank you very much. So to begin with, for this evening, we have a very special recommendation for the Director of Curriculum, and we have Mr. Brett Heller will be presenting that recommendation for replacement of that position. Mr. Heller, you have the floor.
Good evening, Chairman Klopfenstein, members of the board, and Dr. Rannells. Before I make the recommendation for Director of Curriculum and Instruction, I would like to formally thank the executive team and Trustee Newhoff for the time and effort they put into interviewing our candidates and the outstanding discussion which informed tonight's recommendation. With that, it is my honor to recommend Dr. Dustin Barrett for the position of Director of Curriculum and Instruction. Dustin has been in the West Ada School District for 23 years, serving from the southeastern corner of the district at Lake Hazel Middle to the northern edge at Eagle High School. Dustin is currently the principal at Meridian Academy, where he and the other academy principals and staff have done the work of transitioning our academy high schools to a competency-based system. Dr. Barrett wrote his dissertation on personalized competency-based education and has devoted his career to focusing on the success of all students. Dustin is also the father of 3 children, and on Sunday celebrated his wife, Corey, who is a 20-year district employee as a counselor at Eagle Middle. Again, I'm honored to recommend Dustin to you for this position and excited about what he will bring to the team. Dustin is with us this evening and has a few thoughts to share with all of you. Dustin?
Well, mainly I just want to really thank everybody who was involved in the interview process and the team for being giving me this opportunity and having the belief in me. And really, I just want to extend a thank you to all those who were involved. I'm humbled by this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Dr. Barrett. Trustees, do you have any questions or comments you'd like to make?
Mr. Chairman, this is Trustee Smiley.
Trustee Smiley.
Dr. Barrett, it's too early to say congratulations before we have the vote, but as I was looking over the resume, I'm excited by your resume. I do have one question. As we have had to go through the soft closure and we've had to dramatically expand our online learning and doing things in a lot different way than we're used to doing. When it comes to curriculum, what have you noticed that are things we're doing right? And, as Superintendent Rannells would say, have you noticed any luscious challenges of things we can improve?
Chairman Klopfenstein, trustees, and Dr. Rannells. Yes, I've noticed things we've done spectacularly well. And I think the thing that I would like to really highlight as what is spectacular, is the devotion and the dedication of our professionals in this district. We also have lots of luscious challenges and opportunities. One of the things that I know made the transition a bit easier for us at Meridian Academy was that we were already a one-to-one school. So, I know that we are working on developing some of those opportunities district-wide or discussing those possibly. But we already had a platform in place and those one-to-one devices. So I think that that's a big step for the district. We know we're not through this yet, so we've got ongoing challenges, and having those resources available when our face-to-face options are limited to present instruction in a more seamless method. So that's a huge opportunity for us.
Thank you very much for those answers and for your question, Trustee Smiley. Trustees, do you have any other questions or comments?
Mr. Chairman, this is Trustee Newhoff.
Trustee Newhoff, please.
Thank you. Dr. Barrett, first off, I'd like to say thank you for considering this position in a time like this. It's always hard to start a new job and one with a lot of responsibility when you're walking into it with a whole bunch of uncertainty. You don't know what your budget will be. You don't know what the parameters are going to be going forward necessarily. If we have to go in and out of closures and all those sort of things. So I really admire you for that. I have a bit of an advantage here over the other trustees, obviously because I was able to sit in on the interviews, and I'd like, if you could, to expand on one of the points you made at several junctures in your interview, which was that you really see your job, and I hope I'm not putting words in your mouth, but you see your job as facilitating developing the whole student, not just, in terms of, making sure that they learn and master a set of standards, but you seem to take a more holistic view of what we need to be doing and what your position would facilitate. So I was just wondering if you could expand on that a bit.
Chairman Kloppenstein, trustees, Dr. Reynolds, and I appreciate those kind words, Trustee Newhoff, and the opportunity to share some of that input. I definitely do believe that education has evolved. Education is not what it used to be. It was not. It's not the same environment as when I went through the educational system. Now we are no longer in an information deficit situation in education, and we know that a lot of the skills that are going to be needed in order to truly make our learners future ready, right, preparing today's learners for tomorrow's challenges, involves a whole student approach. And that is the development of metacognitive skills. That is the development of emotional regulation. Some of these things that we see are crucial elements and are not elements that we are born with. These are things that need to be taught. These are things that can be enhanced through instruction. So yes, I feel like we need to take a more holistic view of the child, and we need to look at education as an entity that has evolved over time, and now our needs are different. So yes, I agree with you 100%. I appreciate you highlighting that. That will be a big emphasis of mine, is looking at that whole child and some of those executive functioning and metacognitive skills that we know are essential in both college and workplace and in career, that I think really move us to the next level.
Great. Well, thank you. And well, pending our vote, congratulations and good luck. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trustee Newhoff. Any other trustees with questions or comments? Well, Dr. Barrett, thank you very much, and appreciate your words, and definitely have a large job ahead of you, but we're very, very happy you're taking this big step forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
And so that brings us to item B, which is the spotlight for the bond planning discussion, and that'll be headed by Jonathan Gillen. And Mr. Gillen, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good evening, Chairman, trustees, Dr. Reynolds. So tonight we have the bond team with you, some folks from Piper Sandler, Eric Herringer and Michael Keith, Christian Anderson from Zion's Bank, and we're going to talk to you a little bit about our levy rate and some options we have going forward with our bonds. So if you remember, we certify in September. So we certify our levy rate as part of the September tax certification process, but we wanted to get in front of you today to talk a little bit about a potential decrease in our levy rate. And so we wanted to share with you some good news and also be able to share with you some information that we'd like to get out with our parents as we look at what our supplemental levy looks like. We also wanted to talk about a few options that we have associated with our debt restructuring, and that will help save taxpayers money and also help us with flexibility as we continue to manage future debt burden. So I am going to jump right in because many of the folks who are presenting tonight also have a meeting at CUNA School District right after this. It's a lot of time where people are talking about levy rates and taxes. So as we take a look at our levy rate, so currently we are levying $3.51 as a whole. Our recommendation is to reduce that levy rate 65 cents. And so we would be looking at a levy rate reduction that would drop us down to $2.86 as a whole. Again, the major advantage of this, right, is it reduces the property tax burden on our taxpayers. So you might be wondering, in past years, we have talked about a 10% reduction. We've talked about 20-cent reductions. Why so much of the change? Why are we looking at a number like 65 cents? And so really there's two main drivers, much like what you're used to hearing when we talk about levy rate. The main drivers are market rates, right, and our current debt structure. So market rates have continued to increase, as you're all aware. Over the last few years, we've had property tax value increases and our market value has also increased. That is coupled with this year. If you remember when we did our last debt offering, we front loaded a portion of that debt and paid it off during the first 2 years, resulting in less interest paid over the life of the bond. And so that debt is essentially falling off. And so now we have an opportunity to reduce our levy rate associated with that. There are still a couple of unknowns as we kind of look at our levy rate. We want to have full disclosure, right? We don't really know what the market value increase for 2021 is going to be. Today, I got the luxury of being able to take a look at some of Boise's school district's market rates. We are going to have Mr. McQuaid, and him and I actually discussed today, and he's going to be willing to come and share with us during the May board meeting a little bit about market rates and kind of what he sees for the West Ada School District. So we'll be able to get some more insights there. And additionally, we still don't know of the impact of COVID and this crisis on what it looks like for market values the following year as we look into our certifications. But even with those concerns, even with those unknowns, we are comfortable with our ability to be able to reduce our levy rate by 65 cents and help out our taxpayers. And then we'll continue to manage those unknowns, continue to take a look at our risk exposure and continue to manage that going forward. With that, as part of the same topic, as we look at our levy rate, we're also going to look at some options to be able to take advantage of lower interest rates now. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have a couple of those folks that I introduced earlier that are going to share a little bit and talk a little bit about some of our options available with our debt restructuring. And so first on the list is Christian Anderson from Zions Bank. And first I'm going to actually talk about some slides. So before we get to Christian. So this is a picture of our current levy rate reality. If you take a look and see, as you can see, right, this is the picture that we're often used to seeing. As we take a look at that white space, as we look at kind of the dollars we have available coming in, even with our current structure, we have a little bit of white space that is still showing up there. And that's part of the restructuring we're going to look to do, which will allow us to, again, save taxpayers interest and will allow us to kind of manage our debt exposure and be able to handle if we have some changes in recessionary issues in the future. And with that, how we're going to handle and manage some of those changes and the things that we're going to do to lower our interest payments going forward. We're going to talk a little bit next on the list, which is a redemption option. And this is where Christian will chime in.
All right. Can you hear me?
We can.
Perfect. Mr. Chair, this is Christian Anderson with Zions Public Finance. Thank you for having me tonight. So I'm going to talk about the redemption briefly, and then I'll turn it over to Eric to talk about some other tools that we have. So this is relating to your 2010 bonds. A redemption simply means we're going to pay bonds that are currently callable, but in this case, we're going to do it ahead of schedule. So The option we have available here is that your 2010 bonds will become callable on July 30th of this year. And you have two additional maturities, July of 2021 and 2022. Together, they total $6.375 million. On those maturities, you're paying about a mix of interest rates. It is, let's see, 4% on about half and 4.5% on the other half. So between those maturities, there's about $417,000 in future interest. And by taking that $6.375 million out of the existing bond fund, which is essentially surplus funds that have accumulated in the bond fund, by redeeming those bonds now, you'll be able to capture that $417,000 in savings, and it will also, given the way the bond levies work, at the time you certify your levies, it'll give Jonathan some additional flexibility when it comes time to certify. So it's a win-win. Again, adds the flexibility, gives you the interest savings, and in the long run saves taxpayers some money by paying those bonds off. And I'll answer any questions you have.
Trustees, do you have any questions?
Mr. Chairman, Trustee Smiley.
Trustee Smiley, please.
And you know, this may not be the appropriate time for the question if a little later in the discussion is more appropriate. But one thing I'd like to go over a little bit, and I think this is mainly for the benefit of getting it on the record, is to discuss a little bit about the supplemental levy, the $14 million, the availability of those funds, which is a lot more general, that can be used for salaries and things like that, and the nature of the the bonds that we are discussing, which are much more limited. And just for the sake of review, if we could go over that a little bit for the sake of clarity.
I can definitely Chairman, trustees, I can definitely chime in on that question. So Trustee Smiley, yeah, to walk through essentially what we would be looking to reduce is the dollars that we are collecting associated with our bonded debt. So as you know, a supplemental levy is a levy that we levy and our taxpayers approve, and those are dollars that are used for general operations. So it becomes essentially part of our general fund, roughly in the neighborhood of right at 6% of our general fund operations this year. And then there are other dollars that we levy based on the fact that bonds were approved by voters, and these are capital construction bonds. And so these are the bonds that we use to build our buildings, much like the 2018 debt and the 2015 debt that we did associated with capital construction. And so the debt that and the dollars we levy for those are specific as to purpose. And so a change in levy rate associated with the bond fund doesn't reduce what it is we collect associated with our general operations. That's a different dollar amount. But instead, this would essentially be an adjustment of the dollars we're collecting specifically to pay down the debt associated with the capital construction we did and the bonds we sold at that time.
Thank you. I wanted to get that on the record, which is why I asked that question. I really appreciate that answer.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, this is Trustee Johnson. And this may be just a question for you, but I was looking forward to the agenda items, and I guess I would just ask for some help on, this is really good information and I appreciate it. Is there an action we're taking today on this, or is it something it's for information purposes today and we'll have an action later?
We will have an action later. This is a spotlight at this point.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Very good question, though. Mr. Anderson, I actually was curious. Every year we kind of go through this, and I know it's wise to retire. Just for crossing off the T here, what sort of alternative approaches are there? Of course, just not paying. I mean, is there a way to? We often hear about debt burden on our homeowners, and I'm wondering, does this create more debt burden in your view for homeowners, or is this a way to actually reduce debt burden? I know it's saving several $100,000, but does this also reduce debt burden? Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Appreciate your answer.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, this does reduce the future amount that you'll levy. You may recall we've talked in the past about the 21-month calculation. That's a measure of how much on an annual basis the district can collect for the bond levy specifically. And so if we leave these bonds where they are, of course, you'd pay them over time. You'll not only, of course, pay that additional interest that we're going to eliminate if you choose to do the redemption, but it also leaves that money within your 21-month calculation, which doesn't mean that you would necessarily collect that money in the future, but it gives you the opportunity to. So by making this redemption, you've essentially cut the line off to make it to say that as a district, you have accumulated some surplus in that fund balance. I'll note that when I say surplus, this bond fund balance can only be spent on bond redemptions. It cannot be reallocated to other purposes of the district. But within that fund, it's a surplus in the sense that you don't necessarily need this $6.5 million right now. And so you've cut the line off where the district will not be able to collect that in the future, and therefore it is a true decrease to taxpayers in the next couple years.
Thank you very much. The other question I had was, I know there was discussion about, how we're looking at the future, and I think the CPI just came out maybe yesterday. It was even today, which showed an actual drop in on a percentage basis. There was like 0.4% in the core CPI. Does letting go of this does this help in terms of flexibility for the district as prices go down? If we start to get into a position where prices are dropping quite readily, does this help in any way for the district to capitalize on a change like this? I don't think it does, but I'm just wondering in terms of today's numbers, kind of what your opinion of is on this side of the strategy, retiring bonds.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, we've actually reviewed. Well, so there's a couple upcoming slides that Eric and Michael from Piper Sandler, excuse me, will present. And I believe they've stress tested that to a 25% drop in the market value, and have shown that even with a 25% drop, even with this redemption, there's adequate funds within the bond fund, and then also future revenue at this lower levy rate that we're proposing to adequately service your debt.
Excellent. You answered my question thoroughly. Appreciate that. Thank you very much. Any other trustees with questions?
Mr. Chair, this is Trustee Johnson. I have one more question, but I can wait for the first round if you need to.
No, please go ahead, Trustee Johnson.
I'm new, so I want to make sure I kind of understand something or what our limitations are. So if I understand, we have some additional funds in the bond fund that we're gonna, if we redeem, basically we would pay back or pay off, and then we wouldn't have that debt out on our, I don't know what our bond schedule, or I don't know what the terminology is. But is there a limitation? So say for instance, because we did have a bond on our plan and then we've pulled back, but is there any limitations? Like, could we have reduced the bond, a future bond, by that dollar amount and use it together for additional projects in the future if we didn't redeem, or what's our limitations there?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Trustee Johnson, the funds that are collected as part of your bond levy can only be used to pay back existing debt. So the amount that you're allowed to collect is directly tied to the amount of payments that you have ahead of you. And yeah, even in circumstances like this, where you have accumulated a little bit extra, those funds cannot be reallocated to capital projects. They can only be used to repay existing obligations. Okay. Great question.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Anderson. I appreciate the direction.
Perfect. All right. Well, moving on to the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about, the folks from Piper Sandler are going to visit with us a little bit about a refinance option as well. And I guess to follow up with the questions that were asked, tonight's goal is really to educate you on options that we have available and things that we're looking at. During the next board meeting is when we'll actually start talking about approval of language and actually moving forward with the process. And so with that, Eric and Michael. feel free to take over.
If I may, real quick,
hi.
this is Christian. Oh, Eric, perfect.
Yeah,
You made it.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So my audio is coming through?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, this is Eric Herringer with Piper Sandler. I wasn't able to get it on as a presenter on the web, so I just dialed in, but I assume that Jonathan can run through the slides that are appropriate for what I'm talking about, because I can't, I'm not seeing them now. But what we're talking about here is in conjunction with the redemption of the 2010 bonds that Christian talked about, you have the opportunity also to consider refinancing your 2012 bonds. So this is another series of bonds. It was actually a refinancing series in 2012, but you have the ability to use that white space in the graph that Jonathan pointed out to pay the 2012 bond off a couple of years early. So right now that bond's scheduled to pay off in 2024. You could refinance and have that bond paid off in 2022 and save roughly $900,000 of additional taxpayer interest costs. So it doesn't have to be done together with the redemption, but it is similar to the redemption. The difference is that those bonds can't be called right away, so you can't just pay the money over to pay them off today, but you can issue a refinancing bond at an interest rate that we're estimating of about just under 2% to refinance that 2012 bond and pay it off early. So, and then I think the other thing that Jonathan wanted us to talk about is how we'd go about executing the refinancing, but I thought I'd stop there and see if there's any questions on how that refinancing might work, or pros and cons related to it. Trustees, do you have any questions?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I would love to hear some pros and cons on doing that and kind of what the fee costs are versus the savings.
Sure. So we've allocated. So we've gone through some analysis of, okay, you can just leave the bonds outstanding as they are and pay them off as they come due, or you can, because the interest rates are lower today than what you're paying on those bonds, the coupon on those bonds, the interest rate, roughly 4.5% on the existing bonds, roughly 20 million outstanding. So you can, get into a lower interest rate of closer to 2%, and with the resources you have in the bond fund and with your bond levy, again, pay it off a couple years sooner. And so the benefit, the pro, is saving the roughly $900,000. The costs of doing the transaction are built into the refinancing budget, if you will. So they're included in that $905,000 of savings. One of the things when we talked to Jonathan and Christian about this idea, you can do a refinancing in a more traditional way where you issue a new bond in the market. You put together what's called a preliminary official statement that has all the disclosure related to the district's bond offering, and then you get the bonds rated from the rating agencies, and you go through a process, and it takes a while to do, and it's a little more expensive to do it that way. Or because it's such a short refinancing, because you'd only actually have a 2-year bond instead of traditionally you sell 20-year bonds, but a 2-year bond is something you can place with a bank directly, and so you can think of it as just getting a bank loan to refinance an existing bond. And so one, it's a lot more efficient. There's a lot less process that needs to take place. Therefore, there's not as much issuance costs, and we don't have to get a bond rating. We don't have to pay for that, and save on the disclosure costs and things like that. So we kind of compared the two, and we felt that the bank placement route produces roughly $140,000 of additional savings over going directly to the market.
just because of the additional upfront costs. Michael, I don't know, can you comment on specifically what those issuance costs were?
Yeah, this is Michael. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
We can hear you just fine.
We can.
Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, I can certainly comment on the fee side of things for this. So, you know, as Eric mentioned, there's less cost going with the placement side of things, but you would still have, you know, you still need a bond counsel to prepare bond documents, you know, for placement, and then of course Diane's for advisory work. And so we would anticipate that, you know, the fees for this would be probably about all in about $130,000 to execute on the refinancing, on refunding about $20 million total in bonds.
Mr. Chairman and Jonathan, I think maybe just for the next meeting, because it'd just be helpful for me at least to see the visual of what it looks like if we don't refinance, and then what the visual looks like if we do, to see the gap or the savings. And maybe that's what that green bar is. I can't tell. Maybe that's what I'm just missing.
Chairman and trustees, yes. So the green bar is essentially the refinance option that we would be doing. And so what you see is, if you don't see that, obviously it generates additional white space, which then is available if we decided to let the levy rate fall down a little further, right? Then you have a little bit of lower tax burden on the taxpayers. Unfortunately, you'll lose that $905,000 savings associated with the refinance. So long-term costs, you are going to pay out additional dollars. But yeah, that's what the green bar is identified to try to tell you, is what would be the cost and the movement of the debt restructure.
Yeah, and if I might add, on slide 7, where you see those green bars, that's where we're moving bond payments that were spread out between 2022 and 2024. I'm sorry, between 2022 and 2024, and getting them paid off in 2021 and 2022. So you don't see what you don't see in that graph are the payments that were taken away. And I'm just trying to pull it up on my screen here. One second. Sorry, it's taking me a couple minutes here to.
And if you'd like, Chairman and trustees, other things that we could do is we could be able to show you a picture of what both slides would have looked like. And we could have that since we don't have that as part of the presentation tonight, at the next board meeting. The plan was obviously at the next board meeting to be able to bring, there are some legal documents associated with the refinance and the redemption, so that we can discuss those. And then the plan was to be able to bring the bond team back to be able to answer any additional Q&A that kind of came up. As you sat there and thought about things and had additional questions that came up, then we'll be available to answer those as we move through this process.
Mr. Chairman, that next meeting is fine with me. I didn't want to shock or I think it gives people time to prepare. The other kind of just, I'm still learning this process, but one of the questions that I have around this is, if we refi and pay off earlier and we have to, or we decide to do another bond in that time frame, we lose some of that, as we call it, white space. Does that limit the amount that we could bond for in an additional bond in the next 3 or 4 years for our total debt service?
Chairman and trustees, if you would like to move one slide ahead, Troy, I think we're going to have that question. We do have an answer for you right? So so part of what we wanted to be able to show you tonight was being able to show that even if the reduction in the levy rate, and even looking at the bond refinancing and the redemption, what does that do long-term for what our levy rate looks like? And so this assumes no additional growth in our actual levy rate, and it actually walks through what our capital plan was kind of planning to look like. You know, obviously those things change as the market change and as our needs change, but as you can see, it even builds in additional bond sales at 2021, 23, 25, and 27. And so what this is able to show you is that this conversation really is not yet over for us. This will be a conversation that not only will we have again, actually just in July and August when we actually get market values back, but we'll continue to have it next year based on what we see in the market rates, whether a recession then brings in a reduction in, let's say, property values. Let's see that we have the 25% reduction, which we kind of stress test and walk through. What does that look like for our bond exposure, right? And so we'll continue to have those conversations in future years, just at the same time as what happens if we have no growth at all? Are we still able to implement our capital plan and still do the things that we need to do for our students and still look at ways where possibly we could continue to reduce our levy rate going forward?
Great. Mr. Chairman and Jonathan, I love the stress test look here. One of the things, and I'm not going to presume how we'll go because the future seems to be really hard to predict these days, but one of the things that we've discussed in the past is a more of a long-term bond versus the scenarios of what we've historically done, which is every couple years. Is there an opportunity to just stress, is there a stress test that we could look at from the same perspective as if we did a large long-term bond, or does it change anything, I guess, is what my question was.
Chairman and trustees, thank you for the question. A long-term bond would be a larger dollar amount, but usually the way you structure a long-term bond is you don't sell it all at once because there are lots of restrictions associated with, when you have to start calculating arbitrage. So if you did let's say you picked a bond and did a $300 million bond, there's a number we'll put out there. You would essentially design your $300 million structure based on the look at your levy rate and your property values and your capital needs. And so you would have the authorization to sell bonds for $300 million. You probably wouldn't sell $300 million all at once, right? You might do $300 million over a 10-year plan. And so essentially what you would see on this is you would see the levy rate, and then you would see increases and decreases as bonds are paid off and as new bonds come on. But the structure of it probably wouldn't change dramatically. You would just have the authorization. You wouldn't have to you wouldn't be going through the process of going back to voters every time.
So we'd essentially save on all of the fee and costs of doing the voter requirements every time, but we would still probably end up in about the same spot.
Yeah, the structure you would build with the idea in mind of you already have the authorization, right? So now then it becomes a matter of structuring your levy rate and your sales process of when you actually sell the bonds and take them to the market. But again, you wouldn't have the costs and staff time and all of the other process associated with taking it to voters each time.
Okay, thank you.
Do any of the trustees have questions?
Mr. Chairman, this is, go ahead, Trustee Azuna.
Trustee Azuna, you have the floor.
So one thing that I was curious about, one of our selling points with bonds and levies when we go out to the voters is that we've been able to keep our levy rate kind of in one place where we've lowered it. Is this going to put us in a situation that we're going to be increasing our levy rate with future bonds?
Chairman and trustees, thank you for the question. No, that's part of really the desire of doing the refinance, is that it will allow us to it will give us the flexibility to be able to do that. So the goal again is not to have to go and say, as we increase, as we do a capital bond, we have to ask for an increase in levy rate. And so part of these things are allowing us to still keep that flexibility so we won't be in that kind of situation. As you can kind of see, I mean, obviously, as we get further years out, right, the white space may look differently, but we're still able to meet our capital needs and not have to have a levy rate that necessarily goes up and down or has a come up later because we reduced our bond fund balance. And so now as we have to ask for a new bond, we have to increase the levy rate to do that. So short answer, no, it shouldn't cause us that problem.
Okay, thank you.
Trustee Newhoff?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I have three questions. The one is probably largely born of my ignorance, and I guess it's sort of for Christian. With he used the term, I believe, excess bond funds that we're paying off. What happens there if we ended up collecting more than, I guess, the bond is authorized? Where does that money go? I guess I'm a little confused about that.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Trustee Newhoff, this is Christian again. So just to be clear, on the bond levy, the amount you're allowed to collect in any given year is formulaic. It's based on up to 21 months of your payments minus, so that's the actual payments you have ahead of you for the bonds you have sold, minus the balances that you have. So then at some point, there really is no way to have true extra funds, because if you were not to authorize new bonds and you get to the end of that schedule, at some point that calculation is going to force you to only collect what you need and then pay it off and have nothing left. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, okay, yeah. My next question kind of goes into the basis for the diagram we're looking at, and sort of all of our discussion here, which has to do with the interest rate on the bonds. And I'm no economist, but one scenario that people are talking about now, given the economy, is the potential to see some significant inflation, which my simplistic understanding is that increases interest rates. So I guess my question is how sensitive is this stuff? Let's say we went back to the interest rates we had on the 2010 bond or 2012 bond, or went even higher, went back to something like I guess you probably saw back in the 80s.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Trustee Newhoff, there's a lot of conservatism baked into this model as a whole. Specifically, if you look at the red line that comes across this chart here, this is based on an assumption of no additional growth. So there's the 65-cent reduction, and then essentially holding it flat and saying, okay, your market value never grows again. So there's, first of all, with these future bonds, and Eric or Michael could speak more to this, but with the future bonds that are in here, the 2021, 2023, 2025, and so on, that are based on the current capital plan, each of those is assuming higher interest rates than we have today, just to be conservative. But again, we also have that additional conservatism that's based on the fact that this is assuming a flat market value, which is in the long run not a realistic assumption. And so it likely would be able to accommodate higher rates, though in an extreme circumstance, like you mentioned, in the 80s, those types of rates, certainly these are all based on 20-year bonds, and you do have up to 30-year amortizations available to you. And then, of course, in a very extreme circumstance, I suppose you could ask voters for a bond that does raise the levy rate. But again, we feel that there is a lot of conservatism already baked in here, where it's highly unlikely, and it should accommodate even high interest rates.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the explanation. My last question has to do with the reduction in our levy rate. From looking at this plot, the one before, realizing that the space between the top of the bars and the red line would be less if we didn't do the refi, probably, at least in the first 2 years. Are we not almost, are we to the point that we're almost required to reduce our levy rate? So as to not, because we can only buy out 21 months, right, on a bond. So are we almost constrained to that?
Chairman and trustees, Trustee Newhoff, thank you for the question. Part of the reduction is, like when I said earlier, the two major impacts, right, our market rates and our debt structure. Yes, so part of it is just the fact that we are reducing because our debt structure is also lowering. With the front-loaded structure of the last debt and the interest savings generated from that front-loading is gone. And so some of that reduction is just purely out of straight calculation. And that's the reason why the 21-month calculation exists, right? Is so that there's no way to eventually, like Christian said, eventually that calculation catches up and it runs its course and you have to reduce your levy rate. So some of that is just purely built on that.
All right, thank you. That's all I have.
Trustee Smiley, just to make sure, did you have any other questions, just to loop you in?
No, I'm good for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Gentlemen, thank you so much for this presentation. Truly appreciate it. And Mr. Gillen, thank you very much for your leadership. Always appreciate that.
There's one more slide, sorry, and then I'll be done, I promise.
I beg your pardon, sorry. My apologies. So, I don't have visuals, so I'm sorry. I didn't see that.
Yeah. So next steps, right? So Holly Troxel, which is our bond counsel, will be working. We're having a circle up meeting tomorrow to talk about the board meeting and we'll walk through what things we want to be able to put together. And so we'll be putting now part of the legal documentation side. And so the goal is to be able to bring that May 26th for your approval. And so you'll be able to see that. Tonight's goal was really to kind of educate you on what it is we're going to be talking about there. And then we can also follow up with some of the slides that Trustee Johnson wanted to talk about. And then just quick understanding of how the rest of it, the redemption process, if you approve, will start in June. The refinance process and the private placement will usually occur a little later in August. And then in September, we certify. The other things that happen between now and then that I didn't talk about on this slide is we're probably going to circle back up in August because we'll have new market rates and start talking about that 65 cents again and what if at all market rate adjustments have impacted at 65 cents further if we've had market growth adjustments. And now that's it. Now I'll be done, and we'll all be done.
Well, my apologies. Do appreciate you so much, and thank you very much. We look forward to the further discussion on May 26th.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That brings us then to item C, the consent agenda. And first, reach out to Clerk Newbold, see if she has any changes or amendments.
Yes, trustees, Dr. Reynolds. I want to first say that we received no public comment via email. And then on item consent number 17, I sent you all a new agreement that was submitted probably around 5 this afternoon. And we just had some clarification in some of the wording in there. And that's all I have.
Thank you very much. That brings us then to any amendments or changes from trustees. Trustees, do you have any changes? Hearing none. Do I have a motion for the consent agenda?
Mr. Chairman, this is Trustee Ozuna.
Trustee Ozuna.
I move that we approve the consent agenda.
Thank you very much for that motion. Is there a second?
I second.
Trustee Smiley with the second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Trustee Ozuna, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
I was an aye.
Thank you very much. I apologize. And Chairman is aye as well. It makes it unanimous. Thank you very much. And also, if I may say, congratulations to Dr. Barrett. Really appreciate your leading us on this big journey, and I really appreciate all you're going to be doing, and looking forward to seeing what you will accomplish. Thank you very much. That then brings us to section D, discussion. And the first item presented by Mr. Moser will be revised policy 502.5, third reading of the alcohol, drug, and tobacco policy.
Well, good evening, Chairman Klopfenstein, members of the board, and Superintendent Reynolds. The policy that you see before you represents really the final edit in language that takes into account some of the discussion that we had the last time that we met with this. To begin, if you look at under the philosophy, there is a moving of some language that was found in a definition under, actually it was under cannabis, Chairman Klopfenstein, you suggested that we move some of that language under the philosophy to the beginning of the policy. So that's where that change is represented. And then as you scroll down into that policy, there was conversation regarding CBD and different derivatives of marijuana and the definition of cannabis. And what was done there is I just used the definition for marijuana, which does take into account cannabis that is found in Idaho Code 37-2701, and added that language in there to clean some stuff up. And then lastly, there was some language added in there under the marijuana and CBD, and there was some discussion led by Trustee Smiley that brought up the awareness that there's a lot of derivatives now through marijuana and cannabis that can be found in other products. So I did add the language in there, specifically stating that the West Ada School District does not allow any cannabis product that is intended for physical consumption, including the CBD products on school grounds or at school-related events. So those are the changes that were made to this from the last time that we spoke about it. So I stand for any questions.
Mr. Moser, thank you very much for those changes. I really appreciate what you did on these. Trustees, do you have any questions or comments for Mr. Moser?
Mr. Chairman, just want to say, I really do think that that language does clean it up a little bit, and it makes it easier for everyone to understand.
Thank you very much, Trustee Smiley. Is there anyone else?
Mr. Chairman, this is Trustee Johnson.
Trustee Johnson.
Troy, if you could go back to the first kind of 2 pages on the screen, if you don't mind. So first of all, I think language and everything is great, not at all concerned with that. I really, as I kind of had to take a step back and I reread this just from a kind of fresh set of eyes because I hadn't looked at it in a while. And I was just able to do it today. And I think we've been, sorry, you guys, my phone rang. We've given some good feedback over a period of time. One of the things that I just wanted to kind of talk about or put out and think about is the philosophy now has a lot of components, but it sort of right now says basically our alcohol and drug tobacco policy, our philosophy is take your approved medication and drugs and alcohol use is detrimental. And I didn't know if that philosophy was still holistic of what our drug and alcohol policy is. I think it is in content, but maybe not in order of the content. And so I wanted to kind of put that out for thought because I think what we're trying to do with our philosophy here is say we will recognize that there are times when when medical drugs are a necessity for an individual. At the same time, we have an alcohol and drug policy that if it's not something that's medically prescribed, we want to make sure that we support and help a student to not abuse those drugs and alcohol and tobacco. And I'm not sure if our philosophy just in the order kind of outlines where we're at. And so I guess that would be my only comment. I like all the language in general. I just don't know if we're in the right order to talk about our overall philosophy.
So thank you very much. Are there any trustees with any other comments?
Mr. Chairman, this is Trustee Ozuna.
Trustee Ozuna.
I appreciate those comments from Trustee Johnson, and I would agree with what she said, if we could just wordsmith that.
Trustee Ozuna, do you have maybe Trustee Ozuna and Trustee Johnson, do you have an idea of what you wanted to say?
I actually liked the way that Trustee Johnson said it. If we can go back something similar to what she stated, I think would be fantastic.
Mr. Moser, is that clear for you to be able to edit this, or is it, or do you need further direction?
Chairman Klopfenstein, thank you for the question. I would appreciate some additional direction for this, considering this is the third reading. Certainly we can edit this however is needed, whatever the will of the board is. So additional clarity for that would be very helpful for me.
Yeah, Trustee Johnson, for me, I just trying to wrap a motion around this, around what you were saying. I don't quite know how to do that. So is it possible you could come up with a sentence on the fly, I guess, that would kind of represent what you're looking for? And so we could actually attach it to an emotion. Otherwise, we probably should go off to our fourth reading if we don't, as long as the other trustees would agree.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I actually tried to do that right before because I was looking at it and I was weighing whether I even spoke up and how important it was before we got here. And I wrote it down, and then I decided I wanted to see where everybody was at. So I don't have anything right off the top of my head, but I guess I would ask if there is any concern with just doing a wordsmith and a fourth reading, or if we need to have this. I recognize, sorry, Mr. Mosier, I apologize because I understand that you're probably just ready to get this over with. But I think it'd be a quick, easy one to put on the next agenda and probably take us very little time if there's an option to do that. And I could just wordsmith something at that point if you wanted that help.
Mr. Chairman, I would have only one question about doing that. Number one, seems a little unusual to go to a fourth reading unless there was a real need to do that. Number two, are we looking at any time constraints as far as getting it into the student handbooks and so forth for fall? Because I do know we have some hard time limits there.
Yeah, excellent questions. Mr. Mosier?
Chairman Klopfenstein, Trustee Smiley, as a matter of fact, that was going to be a priority that I have right after this is to, I still have yet to meet with the middle school administrators in particular. I think the high school administrators have met and elementary have met to go through the handbook, but I need to get with the middle school administrators and start that handbook process. So that is the consideration. However, whatever the will of the board is, I'm certainly willing to continue to go back and work on it.
Yeah, because Mr. Chairman, with that in mind, my concerns were alleviated with the rewording. And so I have no problem supporting this as written. If it's something that we need to revisit again, I think we can do that. But, you know, here again, I do know with our administrators and our principals, making sure that they understand that we have this policy and then therefore communicating that to students and staff, that is time sensitive. And, you know, we can't leave this on the vine too long.
Yeah, thank you very much, Trustee Smiley. And I have to admit, I do agree, just in terms of process. You know, we try to finish things up by a third reading. And, you know, giving us, maybe we could, I guess, you know, push it to Thursday, I guess, when we have our next meeting. But at the same time, it would be good to have these kind of directions up front. Trustee Newhoff, did you have anything you wanted to weigh in on?
Yeah, I guess, you know, my question for Mr. Mosier with regards to, you know, the timing of all this. I mean, I don't see a problem with going to a fourth reading if we need it. I mean, that's why we sit and hash things out. But is there anything substantive in the student handbooks that's going to change based on the changes that have already been made to this policy? And I don't see the change that Trustee Johnson is suggesting really being something that would impact the student handbook. So, I mean, is there something substantive that I'm missing there?
Chairman Klopfenstein, Trustee Newhoff, no, there really isn't. It's just the, I guess, just the normal timeline that we've had along the way. So if it takes a fourth reading, then it takes a fourth reading. You know, we can get that done.
Yeah, I mean, I just, you know, and I appreciate that. I mean, sometimes, you know, things take that, and I mean, it seems this is going to trump the student handbook. I don't think that anything that's in the student handbook is going to affect a kid's decision to abide by this or not, just to be a little cynical. So, and it seems to me that there's the the parts that are in the student handbook aren't, substantively affected by the changes we've made here, unless there's something with regards to prescription medicines or something. But I'd have to go back and read through those sections. So I would appreciate administration's willingness to hold this over for the sake of considering Trustee Johnson's concern. That's all I have.
Thank you very much. So we will just, for this, I probably would suggest that we just, whatever the will of the board is for the motion, then we'll just take it on within the action portion and either move it to a fourth reading at that point or decide what you'd like to do. So that brings us over to item number 2 under the discussion, which would be revised policy 501.92, dual enrollment, and the first reading with Mr. Stans. Mr. Stans, you have the floor.
Well, good evening, Chairman Klopfenstein, trustees, and Superintendent Reynolds. Dual enrollment policy. This policy, if you already looked through it, you'll see there are no suggestions for revisions for it. It was updated in 2015, and I can just tell you from the region director's perspective, this is a very well-written policy, and it has served us very well. It completely embodies Idaho Code 33203, and then whoever did the revisions in 2015 did a splendid job of just hitting on some fine points that I can certainly provide some examples if you would like, but when we do have some issues that come up with dual enrollment, this policy provides very clear direction. So that is why I have no suggestions or any revisions for this policy, and my recommendation is to continue to keep this policy as it is currently written.
Thank you very much. Trustees, do you have any questions for Mr. Stans?
Mr. Chairman, this is Trustee Johnson. I don't have a question for Mr. Stans. I have a question kind of on just how this works for us. Because this is the first time since I've been here that we have a policy with no changes coming before the board for a first reading. So, and I started in the middle of a year. So do we review every policy at a certain time frame, and we'll have some policies like this, or I guess is this rare, or what's kind of the standard here?
Actually, if I could, I probably could help with that one. Just we have a basically it's a spreadsheet in our Teams site, and for anyone obviously not having access, it's with it exactly right. So we follow this process, and so what's happening is that administration's grabbing these policies, reviewing them, or in this case, choosing not to review them because they feel like it already represents what they were looking for. And then just presenting them back to the board so we can actually provide feedback. So we're just trying to have it on a schedule. Does that help, or
it does?
Maybe
Mr. Chairman, I guess
would like to jump in.
What I was confused about is, and maybe I'm not understanding, but have we already reviewed all policies in our policy manual, never having them come back up a second time, or do we still have some that haven't been reviewed at all? Because that's what I was confused on.
Yes, we have many, many that have not been reviewed. So it's just the process of going through each of them. I believe it is under Chairman Newhoff that he started this kind of Sisyphus sort of project. So we're starting on the first level.
Okay. Okay.
But thank you. Very good question. Any other trustees have questions or comments on this particular on this
This is
policy?
Trustee Ozuna.
Trustee Ozuna.
Mr. Stans, can you remind me, do the dual enrollment students count in our ADA?
Trustee Klopfenstein and I'm sorry, Chairman Klopfenstein, Trustee Ozuna. That's a good question. So we do, and if Jonathan were here, he could give you the specifics as far as ADA. I know we do collect some. I'm not sure about the breakdown on that. We certainly don't get all of it because they are dual enrolled.
And Then a follow-up to that, are we not required to provide transportation? I mean, clearly it states in here that we don't, but is it because they're a dual enrolled student that we don't hold that requirement legally?
So Chairman Klopfenstein, Trustee Ozuna, I'm looking actually at Idaho Code 33203 to see where it mentions that, but I believe even in Idaho Code, if they are dual enrolled, we are not responsible to provide transportation. It's a rather big policy, code here. I'm just glancing at it really quickly to see where they mention it. So at a glance, I'm not seeing where it says we do not provide transportation in Idaho Code.
Would it be possible to bring this one back for a second reading and just kind of confirm on that? I guess I just want to make sure that this isn't one that's fallen through the gap somewhere. Or I'm sure that it's not, because we would be pressed on that if it were.
Chairman Klopfenstein and Trustee Ozuna, I can certainly do that.
Thanks, Mr. Smith. I have one last question. Do you have any idea how many students are dual enrolled either for an academic class or for an extracurricular activity? How many kids fall in this kind of category?
Chairman Klopfenstein, Trustee Ozuna, I don't have exact numbers to give that to you. I can just speak on my own experience as a former high school principal, and then just I can just speak to just some of the cases in the schools in the North region. So at the high school level, I can tell you it's not a large number, and typically it would be homeschool students who take perhaps some core classes or even elective classes. It just depends at the high schools. And then we will have a handful, I will say a few, that participate in the extracurricular activities. When you drop down to the elementary level, this is where the number drops off significantly. And this is where the policy has actually, I think, provided some really good clarification. So at the high school level, it's very clear. You're signing up for a specific class, whether it be math, science, choir, etc. And students, they come for that class and then they leave. At the elementary level, they are to do the same. They're signing up for a specific academic coursework. So I know previously, talking with Dr. White when she was director prior to this policy being changed, I think you would have families that want to dual enroll, but it was more, well, I want to drop my student off for an hour on Mondays and maybe 2 hours on Tuesdays. And it wasn't specific. And so now what we say is, what course of study would you like? Well, we want math. Okay, well, math instruction is delivered for 4th grade at Star Elementary from 10 o'clock to 10:40 every day. So the expectation is students are dropped off for that class and then they're picked up. Prior to this policy clarification, my understanding is there were a lot of requests for students to be dropped off. They might receive math instruction, but then, hey, could you please just let them hang around until we're able to pick them up. And this is very clear that no, they're there for specific instruction, and then the school is not responsible for providing daycare, so to speak. So, but to answer your question though, Trustee Ozuna, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me. I'd have to get that from Jonathan Gillen.
And that's okay. I was just curious, but thanks for that additional information. It's really good to know that this policy is working.
Yeah, certainly. And I'm Trustee Ozuna, I'm sure I could, since it sounds like I'm going to do a second reading on this policy, I can certainly get some stats from Mr. Gillen and provide that for everybody just to satisfy your curiosity, in case you're just wondering how many students we have that are dual enrolled.
That'd be great.
Thank you. Any other trustees with questions for Mr. Stans?
Mr. Chairman, this is Trustee Newhoff.
Trustee Newhoff, please.
Yeah, I'm just to open Pandora's box here. I'm just curious if this policy applies to situations where we have agreements, like for instance, kids that go to Treasure Valley Math and Science. It seemed to me there might be some CTE programs that are impacted between us and Boise. Are those sort of programs governed by this?
Chairman Klopfenstein, Trustee Newhoff, yes, it actually does specifically. So I believe it's in line 86. It talks about specified classes, and where we have classes where there's a cap to them, the full-time students have precedence. They have top priority for these classes. So I can speak to the CTE classes as a former Meridian High School principal. Many of those classes were full just with our own full-time students, from the academies and our traditional high school. So if a homeschool student wanted to get in one of those classes, there had to be a room for it, but there had to be room. And that also is outlined in Idaho code specifically, that they do not, the full-time students get top priority, first priority over classes. So good question.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you very much, Mr. Stans, and I look forward to, a second reading. Appreciate that so much. And that brings us into item number 3, would be revised policy 501.9 on student transfers. This is also a first reading, and Dr. White will lead. Dr. White.
Good evening. Thank you, Chairman Klopfenstein, members of the board, and Dr. Reynolds. I'm bringing forward policy number 501.90 for a first reading. It deals with student transfers, and what this line is really supposed to do, the line in red, is align our practice with policy. So our practice has been to consider full-time employees that have children that attend a school that has been capped. So in our practice, we have done that, but it hasn't always been in policy. So I would like to bring that forward. And I also want to make note that Trustee Ozuna did have an email conversation with me with a few clarifications on wording, which I will bring forward in the second reading. And just for your knowledge, some of the clarification had to do with stating in district request, it says we will be considered on a first come first served basis. That similar wording would also be introduced or added to the request for open enrollment students attendance. So we would have similarity between in district and open enrollment with a first come first basis wording. And of course, Trustee Ozuna, if you have other additions that you would want to bring forward to the group, I would not speak for you, but allow you to speak to that. And I'm open for questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. White. Trustees, do you have any questions for Dr. White?
Mr. Chairman, this is Trustee Ozuna.
Please, Trustee Ozuna.
Dr. White, after our conversation today, or email exchange, I was thinking more about it, and I'm actually wondering if it would make more sense to state something. So in this section, we're talking about the in-district request, and then later on in the policy, we talk about out-of-district requests. And I think we want priority to be given to students of our full-time staff members, regardless of whether they're in or out of district. So I think it makes sense to kind of pull it out of that category. But I'm wondering if it would make more sense to just say something like special consideration will be given to students of full-time staff members. And then not even talk about the cap schools, not to talk about anything else, because from what I'm understanding, we're always given the students of our staff members a higher priority, regardless of when their transfer request comes in, or if a school is capped, or maybe enrollment is just tight. But maybe we could just say that special consideration is given to these students.
Chairman Klopfenstein, Trustee Ozuna, that makes sense, and we can absolutely do that.
Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman, this is Trustee Johnson. I support what Trustee Ozuna said. And then I don't have a question. I would just ask for a piece of information to come back on the second reading. And if there is some numbers around kind of the number of out of district students that we have that aren't staff versus our staff, and or just total, some numbers on that. I was trying to understand, I've seen a number of those requests come through, but what's our total number of people that we have coming from out of our district into our district? And is there an impact there? I just want to know what the policy impact or the impacts of this policy have been.
Chairman Klopfenstein and Trustee Johnson. So if I'm hearing you right, are you making reference to Hillsdale, which is the particularly capped school, or are you making reference to the number of open enrollment students versus within district students versus employees' children district-wide?
I think probably my question has nothing to do with Hillsdale.
Okay.
It has all to do with, I just wanted to understand how many students we have coming from outside of West Ada School District, or we're currently allowing to come in through this policy into our school district. So within district transfers, I think, is a different topic, but out of district is similar. Now, I know we're going to have some teacher or some staff members in that bucket. And so that's why I was trying to separate those out, because those I would see this policy change touching no matter what, but I wanted to understand what the impacts of the non-staff numbers were.
Trustee Johnson, I can bring that information forward with the second reading. So what I will bring forward, just for clarity purposes, I'm going to bring forward the number of students that we have currently that are open enrollment students, and also screen out the ones that are open enrollment students but staff members' children.
Thank you.
Yes,
That's
I
perfect.
can bring that forward.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions for Dr. White? Seeing none, thank you very much, Dr. White. Appreciate your presentation.
Thank you.
Next item is item number 4, revised calendars for 2019-2020 traditional calendar. Mr. Yoakum will be presenting, but I'm not sure, Mr. Yoakum, maybe you'd like to just combine both of them, or we just seamlessly go from one to the other. So I'll let you lead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Superintendent Reynolds. So the next 4 items on the agenda are all connected. We have the revised 1920 traditional and modified calendars, along with the revised hours, the instructional hours. So those are before the board this evening, and the calendar revisions are as follows. We have noted the days that all West Ada schools were closed. They're on March 30th till April 10th, and then March 16th to the 20th. We added the remote learning dates, so that's just a block of days starting on April 13th and runs to the end of the year, June 2nd, if it's traditional, June 12th if it's modified. We did change April 10th, April 14th, and April 27th to school days, and those days are spread out over both calendars. Of course, we did not have the collaboration or the day without school for modified. And then we removed the June 1st, June 2nd, and June 12th early release days and just made those instructional days. So no change at the end of the school year for traditional modified has been made. And upon approval by the Board of Trustees, the revised calendars and the instructional hours will be sent to the State Department of Education, along with a request to waive the minimum number of instructional hours from 2019, 2020.
Mr. Yoko, if I could just be clear, so we're accepting questions on 4 through 7, is that correct?
Yes, if that's acceptable, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, it's very acceptable. I just wanted to make sure I was clear so we know how to progress forward. Trustees, do you have any questions on what Mr. Yoakum is providing?
Mr. Chairman, this is Trustee Newhoff.
Trustee Newhoff.
Yeah, so if we go and compare the instructional hours for elementary grade levels between traditional and modified, we'll see that there, as Trustee Johnson suspected in a recent meeting, that there's an extra week in the modified calendar school, modified calendar hours based on the calendars that are up for consideration here. Personally, I'm a bit uncomfortable with that from an equity perspective in terms of the kids. In part, also considering that families are, part of this remote learning plan that's extending for an extra week for the modified calendar. But I also don't understand the human resources implications of having people under nominally the same contract, and now we're approving calendars that have different numbers of instructional days. For what should be, look, obviously there's some different situations, and the academies are different and those sort of things. But my understanding is that our concept is that the only thing that's different between a traditional calendar elementary school and a modified calendar elementary school is which specific dates the kids are going to school. I don't know what administration's response or explanation to that is, but it seems to me to create a pretty significant disparity there.
Mr. Chairman, Trustee Newhoff, so there is a difference in the adjusted 1920 hours. That is true. We used 4 hours per day for the remote learning, and that's why we have the discrepancy of, say, 16 hours, 15 hours or so. I would also like to point out to the board that while there might be a discrepancy in hours, there is also a discrepancy in the amount of time that the traditional students received in-person instruction from classroom teachers versus the modified. Before we closed, the traditional students had received 122 days of in-person teacher-directed instruction versus 119 for the modified. So there are discrepancies. That is true.
Okay, I appreciate that, and obviously, trying to equate these remote learning days to in-class instruction days is it's a nonsensical task, really. There's no way to really compare them, but I'm concerned, and I don't know if Dave Roberts is on the call. Has there been any discussion with our negotiating body about this plan?
Mr. Chairman, Trustee Newhoff, there's been no conversation I've had with anyone in the negotiations or the association. I believe that Dave has received some feedback, and if he's listening in, I would ask him to share what that is. But I think it's important to remember that nobody is being paid any less for the contracted amount they were signed for. It's 187 days was the annual contract. So nobody's losing anything with the calendar as it is before the board this evening.
Chairman Klopfenstein, Trustee Newhoff, and Superintendent Reynolds. This gets to be an interesting conversation, and it's, you know, we're in this certain situation we are now, and there are, you know, oftentimes that we have closures in our schools, in sometimes some of the schools, not in others, with snow days or other emergencies. When we did have Snowmageddon, we did have some exceptions when we worked on President's Day and Martin Luther King Day to make up, you know, 2 of the 6 days. And it you know, we've not, again, I think it goes back to what Trustee Newhoff said. I mean, it gets to be a very difficult comparison or nonsensical comparison of what in classroom days are versus remote days and things like that, and whether there's equity. I mean, our concern is that we typically have not, when things were in our control, adjusted working calendars for people based on how we're paying them, and we've maintained the calendar. So cutting a calendar short was, our thought was not with what aligns what we've done in the past, when there's been times when a school was out and people couldn't come to school, whether it was for a, you know, emergency at that school, or whether it was a discrepancy in snow days when Modify was in and traditional was not, or vice versa. So that was our thoughts in that.
Okay, and I guess I you know, going back to Snowmageddon, I don't see where it would have impacted them differently, because modified calendar track break is in March, but and the dates that you're talking about were in January and February. But you know, my discomfort here is, and I don't know, I'm kind of at a loss for where to go with this, except that I know some patrons have called into question why we would do this and end up having more time in the remote learning section for the modified calendar schools, when they didn't, you know, they didn't miss out on as much traditional instruction. And I don't know. I guess I'm at a bit of a loss here, but I would have a lot more comfort if there was some guidance from the West Data Education Association. I mean, this is something that's we're gonna hear about in the long run. And so I don't know. I'm kind of at a loss here. I don't know what else to say.
Mr. Chairman.
Trustee, excuse me. Joe, please.
Mr. Chairman, Trustee Newhoff, if I could provide some historical precedent in this case that might help the board with the decision. There's been 2 incidents that I'm aware of in the last, I think, 10 years that did not involve snow, where we did have to close a couple schools for unforeseen reasons, things beyond our control. One was at Mountain View High School. I want to say about 10 years ago, there was a mercury spill at the school, and the school was closed for 3 days. And the kids came back after the building was cleaned and cleared. And at that time, we did not make any calendar modification, nor were the students expected or the staff made those days up. The other example was Galileo, the K-8 school there in Eagle. During the winter one year, it lost its heat early in the day, and there was no way to get it repaired. So the students were all sent home. All the students were picked up that day, and there was no calendar adjustment made in that case either. So there has been some unforeseen circumstances in the past where we've had closed individual schools, but we did not revise the calendar or contracts in those situations.
Okay. Hey, thank you. I appreciate that. I'm just curious what my colleagues think.
Trustees, do you have any questions or comments?
Mr. Chairman, this is Trustee Johnson. Trustee Newhoff actually hit exactly where I was going to hit. I think the answer that I was really looking for to understand, and Joe, those examples were really good and they were single schools. And I'm guessing that we still met the total state curriculum hours required in both of those situations. But in this situation, we have an opportunity to make it equal. And I wanted to understand why we wouldn't do that. What's kind of our thought process, or why this recommendation versus that?
Mr. Chairman, Trustee Johnson, when you say make it equal, do you mean reduce the modified by a number of hours so that's closer to traditional?
I think what I'm looking for is why wouldn't we could do, there's more than one option to make it equal. I just would want to understand why we wouldn't want to do that. Why are we wanting to treat the two different school calendars hours different?
Mr. Chairman, Trustee Johnson, can you give me some ideas what you think the options might be, and I could answer each one of those directly?
There's two options. One would be add more hours to traditional and extend out the days, or the other option is reduce the modified, I think, or some combination there within. I'm just trying to understand, why would we want to keep them not equal? What's our educational kind of operational imperative or policy, or what's our reasoning behind this?
Well, Mr. Chairman, Trustee Johnson, I think extending the traditional school day beyond June 2nd at this point in the year would be met with a significant amount of resistance, not only from our patrons, but from our staff as well. I'm sure they've made plans, be it a vacation or what it might be. Our thought is that would not go over very well at this late date. And that's oftentimes what we take into consideration when it comes to calendar revisions, is we do weigh the potential impact of changing a time that families or our staff may have planned some event thinking they would not be working or that school would be out. And I think on the other option, to reduce the time, is that we have control over the situation at this time. Back in March, we did not have control. The schools closed, and that was something that we couldn't contain. And we do pay people if we work the annual contract, and no one is denied that compensation. So when a certified staff member does sign the contract, there's an assumption that the individual is agreeing to work the designated number of days, and in this case, it's 187. So our recommendation would be that we not reduce the school, the modified calendar by 5 days when we, have control over that situation versus the other where we did not.
Yeah, I think I'm still not quite hearing the educational impact of it. I think I heard the contractual items, and I understand that, but what I'm trying to understand is why we would recommend a certain set of students get more educational hours when we have control than others.
Chairman Klopfenstein, this is Mary Ann. West 8 is unique in that we have schools of choice, and the modified calendar is something unique to our district, and not very many districts have mixed opportunities for parents to choose from. And when we spoke with officials at the state level in terms of their guidance and suggestions on how to handle the discrepancies in hours. The recommendation we were given was to do the best that we could and to request a waiver at the end. So I don't remember any conversation about total number of hours in terms of the situation as it impacts educational time. But what I would say is that our teachers, whether they're on the modified calendar or on the traditional calendar, have gone above and beyond their typical work hours and in meeting the needs of the kids remotely. So to capture that would be very challenging in and of itself. So the most logical thing we could recommend is that we proceed through the year in good faith and doing the best that we can and have school end when the calendar was approved by the board before, and then to request a waiver from the state.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman.
Trustee Smiley.
I appreciate what Superintendent Reynolds said. One of the things that we may end up doing, we're going to have to ask for the waiver anyway. And what I see happening here from Mr. Yoakum is that we're simply trying to reflect the reality of what actually is happening, because we're going to have to go before the state and request a waiver anyway. And we might, we might end up outthinking ourselves on this. We kind of have to do this simply to reflect what has actually happened. Which none of us wanted, none of us like. All of us would love to have these kids, do the hours they need to have, and I just don't see there's any way we can unbang this cannon. We have to kind of go from where we are and hope and pray that we will learn from this. We will make better plans for next year, but this is just simply reflecting the reality of what has already happened. And we're going to have to take this to the state board for a waiver anyway with both calendars. So we might as well have some consistency in them. And I realize that we could get, into the woods just a little bit here and try to get all of the exact number of hours the same. But I don't think it reflects the reality of what actually is happening here.
Thank you, Trustee Smiley. And I have to admit, just from my perspective, would like to chime in a little bit on this one. That the bus is upside down and everyone's trying to push it down the street. And that's what we've got, a system that is broken. And as many rough edges that we can make smooth, I think would be a wise thing. To say one group of teachers, and I know there is some concern in the district where some teachers are believing that they worked harder than others and such. That maybe that's going around, I don't know, but I would say that all teachers are putting in extra hours and working very hard and trying to do their best for kids. I think it would be a very difficult thing, and just, again, my personal view, that, we as trustees, if we could show compassion in this situation and to realize that maybe reaching out to Dr. Barrett here, a few others, poor Mr. Dr. Barrett, that maybe there would be, some possibilities for next year. And we're kind of leaning towards fall, that knowing that this sort of situation will come up again, that these ideas, especially what Dr. Newhoff and Trustee Newhoff, and Trustee Johnson are concerned about, maybe we could start looking at these as a package where we can make sure that this doesn't happen again. The wheels are off. We have a problem now. We know we'll get a waiver, or at least we'll be applying for a waiver. And we're not seeing resistance from the ISBA or state board. So I think we have a chance to at least get everyone back on track and maybe make a clean slate. And then maybe at this point, start looking at how we can make fall look a little more educationally oriented. maybe look forward instead of behind is my suggestion. Any other trustees with Trustee Ozuna? I'm not sure if I heard you. Not sure if you'd like to talk on this one.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I like things to look equal because that makes it really easy to understand. That said, when I look forward to the fall, that makes me a little nervous as we talk about, you know, there's so many what ifs. You know, what if there's a case at a school and we close a single school and not all schools? And, you know, I think if we were to, it would make me a little nervous if we were to try and make these hours equivalent, that we may be setting ourselves up with a precedent for the fall that would be really hard to make that work when we don't know what fall is going to look like for us yet. But I don't have strong feelings around this either way. But I am nervous looking ahead.
Mr. Chairman, this is Trustee Johnson. I think I had one comment that I think I would just put out for consideration. We've had some teachers really step up and help the remote learning. The other kind of well, some are qualified, some are not, but the rest, we've also had some parents, a lot of parents, step up and do a job that they never intended to do for a long time now. And I guess that's where I'm coming from, is that there's two pieces, right? One, the equity piece, but the other piece is, and I mean, I can speak from personal experience, you know, when you're working from home full time and trying to teach your kids at elementary school level full time, frankly, I'm looking forward to the day that that's not happening anymore. And so I think there's another stakeholder group that we're heavily impacting right now that maybe we should think about in our consideration on this one too.
No, I appreciate that. I think one of the concerns I have, kind of looking forward, is making sure that the district is not just planning for obviously issues like calendar adjustments and things like this, but also it's very possible that we may be facing a situation of being underfunded, that we may be facing a situation where we're having to, you know, shutdowns during the year. I think it's back to that idea of really needing to sit down and take a really hard look at what this district's going to look like under COVID for the next year. We're not going to get a vaccine. This is not changing. And parents, unfortunately, it's a dark reality, but it is the reality we're facing. And when school gets a case in this next year, what do we do? What does that look like? And I think it's come down to a choice issue at this point. And unfortunately, parents, they love their kids. And this is an issue of making sure that we can get those kids taught in the best way we can and having a policy that works for them. So anyway, I'm joining on. Any other trustees with comments on this?
Trustee Klopfenstein, Chairman Klopfenstein, this is Trustee Newhoff. You know, one of my concerns here is that we're kind of kicking a can down the road. Because of next year. You know, we're still going to have the modified calendar in place in next year. And if we do have rolling closures or, you know, a closure that comes in the middle of a semester like it did now, if there's some second wave that comes on in October, we're going to be back having the same discussion because the modified calendar is going to start a couple weeks before the traditional calendar, and they're going to be offset in this whole scenario because we're not going to have a different closure calendar for them. And so, you know, I think it's rather relevant to wonder whether we're establishing some sort of precedent with the proposal from the administration tonight, and whether that's the precedent we want to have. I mean, it's a big discussion with a whole lot of unknowns, and you know, I don't know. I mean, I wish we could have the discussion in terms of what was best for kids, but we don't know. I mean, we don't have the ability to understand how the current situation and whatever improvements I'm sure that our great team is going to make as we reflect on what we've done and hopefully can commit some resources to the well, I don't want to use the term eventuality of further remote learning. I want to be an optimist here, but you know, there's a reality there that I think we're going to end up facing again. And when we face it, it's going to be over Teams, unfortunately, and not enjoying an in-person discussion. So I don't know. I guess but I would like to hear administration's feelings about that. I mean, if we move on next year and we have a situation like this come up, what's the game plan? Are we setting a precedent here about how we handle differences in these two calendars or not? And I'll leave that open to Mr. Yoakum or Dr. Rannells or whoever.
Exactly. Thank you.
So Chairman Klopfenstein, this is Marianne. In conversations since my first year here with the modified calendar schools and the input we've received from parents who choose to participate in that calendar, every year something comes up that causes some kind of a glitch between the traditional calendar and the modified calendar. And the saving grace of it has always been that our teachers and administrators never slight any child when it comes to instruction. So while we have to turn in a calendar with the days and the hours and all of that into the state for approval, the desire of the families who choose the modified calendar have always experienced challenges and differences in their time where schools closed during the school year and when traditional calendars are still in session. Sometimes it goes the other way. Sometimes the modified calendar schools benefit from the time of the year-round calendar versus the traditional calendar. So again, it really goes back to how much we value the opportunity for the modified calendar schools and having that as a choice. The precedent, I'm not sure what precedent. I would be afraid if we changed. I would not want to set a precedent where, at least in this situation, I would always have to analyze what's happening and what's under our control and what isn't in terms of how we best meet the needs of our kids. But we didn't take this lightly. We spent hours and hours looking at various possibilities, and we talked about extending the school year. We talked about extending the school day. There were a number of things that we looked at, and the feedback we received from the teachers and the principals and the regional directors was that in keeping with the advice and guidance from the state, we did the very best we could, and our teachers and our parents, as Trustee Johnson so eloquently stated, have worked their heinies off to make sure that our kids receive the best that they could. So my ardent advice is that the board would accept the calendar and approve the calendar and allow us to request a waiver from the state. And the discussion that we will certainly have with the calendar committee and with our staff and administrators of moving forward is the what ifs. And Mr. Nesbitt and his team are certainly addressing many of those issues. I don't know if we'll have all the answers, but we'll certainly have some options in terms of, well, what would be reasonable? Because we want it to, again, to go back to the conversation, we take great pride in having a quality education in West Ada for all children, and I will stand by that.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Trustee Smiley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Superintendent Reynolds and Mr. Yocum. Your point is well taken. You know, I take this from a little bit different perspective, and that is one to where I've looked at the philosophical reasons behind a modified calendar and why most schools follow the traditional calendar, and I'm proud of our district. I think that West Ada has done their very, very best to reflect, you know, the calendar with how kids best learn. And there's a lot of good philosophical arguments for the modified calendar as far as the way children learn. But we also have to reflect that when you're dealing with families and one child's on the modified calendar, another child's on the traditional calendar, and when you get up to high school, if you have some kids that are elementary, some kids are high school, that's a real problem for families. And frankly, now at this late date, there isn't a lot of options that we have. The 2019-2020 school year, it is what it is. And we can discuss philosophically what's the best way moving forward, and we absolutely need to have those discussions. But I believe that what we're doing here tonight as a board is we might be overthinking things a little bit. In a perfect world, none of this would have happened, but we don't live in a perfect world. And moving forward, I think this is a great lesson for us to where, as we look at next year's calendar, let's have these discussions. But I think that the school district can be congratulated, and this is one of the reasons why it's been hard to get the modified calendar to be universally accepted, because it's hard to deal with families when you have one child in high school, one child in middle school, another child in elementary school. It makes it difficult. And I think what we have to do is we just simply have to acknowledge the reality of what has happened this year and try to make the best of it. It's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be equivalent. We just have to kind of move forward on that. And I think these are excellent points that have been brought up. And I think those are discussions that we should have and we need to have as a board. And I really appreciate the discussion because Trustee Johnson brings up some excellent points. But I think what we have to do as a board moving forward is we just simply have to acknowledge the reality as what has happened.
Mr. Chairman, this is Trustee Johnson. I have a kind of a question, and I think it's probably for Dr. Reynolds, and it's an understanding question. Then I have a comment after, but And I really, really appreciate kind of the understanding the process everybody went through in the decision making, because I think that's what I was looking for in the why. Is there's just so many variables right now. It sounds like that it was hard to really know what the right answer is, right? Which is where we're at as well. One of my questions is around, and just kind of an understanding, is there an option to make those last, those difference in hours optional? So, and I don't know what that would look like, but if there was, and I'm coming at it from a parent perspective, so I will tell you that I am coming at it from that, because I think the teacher perspective is the same whether it's optional or not. But what I'm watching as I look around my neighborhood with all of my neighbors educating multiple kids in their own home, in elementary school mostly, is it's tough. It's really tough. And so when I was looking at the number of hours, we don't know the educational impacts on the kids, but I'm also concerned that we're counting the hours like they're really actually getting additional hours. And what I'm watching is that it's so hard that it's hard to really actually deliver that education consistently across multiple homes, even in the same small loop and community. And so I wanted to know kind of what, but I also know that parents don't want to undercut their kids, right? And so they look to the school calendar and they look to that, they look to us to say, what am I supposed to do? Or many do, I think. And so I was just kind of wondering what there is around. Some parents might feel shortchanged because their kids don't have as many hours, an option for that. And some parents might feel overtaxed because they have extra hours that they're having to deliver education under. And it's going to be different for everybody. So I just wondered what there is around the option of optional.
If I could just jump in right before Dr. Reynolds jumps in. Trustee Johnson, if I could just have you condense that question. I'm having trouble trying to understand how best, if I was kind of thinking through what you're saying, I just want to make sure it's clear. Are you asking, I mean, the district, I'm not sure it can respond to parents specifically on an emotional level, but as far as a what you want them to do level, what are you looking for as a solution? Is that your question, or are you looking for a solution?
I am. So if you can flip, Troy, if you can flip to the next slide, I think it has the hour differences on it, and I can be more clear. So we have 421 hours in traditional adjusted hours, I think, in traditional school. Or sorry, excuse me, we're asking for a waiver of 28 hours. Am I looking at that right for traditional?
That is correct. That is what we'll be submitting.
Okay, and 16, and those are the kindergarten programs, and then we're 69 and 53. So we're looking at around a difference of around 16 hours, I think, total is what you said, Joe. So those 16 hours difference there, there's two things that are going to happen if we approve as is. One is that the parents in the traditional program, so let me back up. Remote learning is online. You can pull the packets down yourself. You can pull them from anywhere. I could essentially pull a packet from Spalding Elementary versus Hills Elementary. It won't matter, right? I mean, it will matter in the fact that I'm going to a different school, but in the end, I should be getting about the same level of education, whether I pull it down at 4th grade at Spalding or 4th grade at Hillsdale. So what we're doing is we're saying, for you parents that are in this traditional school program, you're done pulling down packets on June 2nd. And you parents that are in this modified school program, you've got to pull down packets for an extra week. And I guess what I'm wondering is, can we make that extra week optional?
No, at this point, when we look at annual contracts and contractual days, I guess from what we're turning into this state, I don't see any way we can do that through our contractual obligations. that isn't a precedent I would recommend that the board set. But I would wonder that for parent, I don't know what parents would feel at home in terms of making those decisions at home. And it would just be the elementary level. So that Trustee Johnson, trustees, that would not be a recommendation I would feel comfortable with.
Okay, thank you. That's what I was trying to understand. So I think I really appreciate kind of understanding the decision-making process that everybody went through, because that was what I was trying to get at with the why. I also understand where we're at. And I guess I would just ask that it be on the record as we go through this, that we are doing this and intentionally not setting a precedence yet until we have discussions later on how we could handle this in a systematic way.
So thank you. Trustee Newhoff, did you want to do the same and just kind of clarify as far as what you were looking for from tonight? I'm not sure if you want to weigh in on that.
Well, I think, I would like clarification on something that Trustee Johnson brought up. And maybe, I don't know if anyone that's on the call can do it, but what is that extra week for the traditional calendar or for the modified calendar? Is there something substantively, are they behind a week? Are they, is there some difference in the material they're getting?
Yeah, I'm sorry, you're directing this to Dr. Reynolds, is that correct?
Well, Dr. Reynolds, Mr. Nesbitt, Mr. Heller's on the line, I believe.
Okay, so you're asking what's materially different in the instruction, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Dr. Reynolds, would you like to try that one?
I will try. And again, our schools, there are variables in just during the normal course of the year in terms of what activities are planned and how the days are scheduled. But if I substantively look at the helicopter view of our modified calendar schools and our traditional schools, there's no significant difference in the amount of time and the amount of learning that was sent home to those elementary schools. I have no evidence that there was more or less between the two calendars.
And I appreciate that. And my kids went to a modified calendar school, so I understand the comment she made earlier about how there are things that are going on that they have to do during their track breaks and vice versa. But I guess what I'd like to get a handle on is philosophically how that difference has been handled in designing the curriculum during this remote learning period. If the idea is that, okay, well, we stepped into this remote learning period, and I guess the kids in traditional calendar got 3 more days of the kind of instruction we'd hope they'd all get, which is being with a teacher in a classroom. And then we planned on 5 more days of remote learning. Was there a difference in how the materials and the curriculum was set up between modified and traditional for this remote learning period that started on April 13th or whenever it was?
Mr. Chairman, this is Mr. Heller. I'd be happy to speak on this.
All right, thank you.
So Chairman Klopfenstein, Trustee Newhoff, I mean, I think the biggest difference between the two is just in a scope and sequence idea that we have schools in different places in their scope and sequence of instruction, and given that some schools are on a modified and some are on a traditional calendar, there's going to be differences in terms of where each of those schools were in their instructional sequence and in the learning progression as they returned back from their track break and entered into a remote learning phase. So where they were in that instructional process was going to be different, which means, you know, as they finish this school year, there are going to be pieces of their essential priority standards that they are still working to make sure they're covering for all of their students. There's going to be fall ready targets they're going to continue to work on. To get into the minutia necessarily of one school versus another, or how one track break group of kids compared to a traditional group of students, I wouldn't have that in front of me. We could certainly look at their remote learning materials and get a better idea, but I think there's just probably just a scope and sequence and where they were instructionally that was different. And now those teams are going to continue working forward those extra days and ensuring as close as they can that those fall ready targets are being hit.
Okay, I guess, I mean, in getting back to Trustee Johnson's contention that I mean, if you're are the packets different at Spalding versus Hillsdale, or different at Seven Oaks versus Eagle Hills, or are they the same packets?
They are different, Trustee Newhoff, in that they are created by the PLC teams at those buildings. So every PLC team at a building are the ones putting those together. So they are going to vary from building to building, from PLC team to PLC team at the same grade level. That just is the inherent nature of the art and science of the teaching process that's going to be different from PLC team to PLC team.
Mr. Chairman and Mr. Heller, I think to follow along those lines, though, I've just pulled like a Spalding packet and a Hillsdale packet for first grade. Content-wise, are they different? I mean, they'll look different, but content-wise, are they different as far as the educational requirements that they have to meet within them?
If we're talking the priority standards, which are year-end targets, they're going to be the same. A traditional calendar elementary school has same year-end targets that the modified calendar school has. Again, one week's packets might be very different than another's from the content perspective, only because of where they were in their scope and sequence of instruction. I can't say for sure, again, without looking at those packets, how different the content might be. Overall, what they're trying to accomplish in a year is going to be the same content. It's just going to be potentially different week to week based on where they are compared to a traditional calendar school potentially. But again, I wouldn't want to speak too concretely on that without looking at a aligned, take two packets side by side from the same week, one from a traditional, one from a modified, and maybe looking at what targets they're aiming for could be potentially different in that same week.
Yeah, I would like to kind of bring. I realize we could go through packets. We could go through discussion on some very high level, philosophical issues about calendars and such. I definitely think, as kind of going back to what Trustee Smiley was saying, is that we could definitely get into those areas. That might be a time for another day, though. For tonight, what is your thinking on? Maybe I'll start with Trustee Newhoff. Are you thinking to approve with these calendars changes tonight, or are you looking to hold them? And if we do, what implication does that have for timelines? And it might be something we might even have to have an emergency meeting for. Just realized, but Trustee Newhoff, if you could just give what you see as the best path forward here tonight.
Well, I was going to abstain, to be honest with you. I'm confused. I guess I don't feel like I understand enough of the details on all of this to say one way or the other what the right path is here. I mean, I understand what administration is saying in part, although I don't know. I mean, if the traditional calendar schools were half a week ahead, was there that much difference? And do we prolong this? I don't know. But what I'm more concerned with is that we don't have, I don't understand what the philosophy is going forward if we have the same kind of disparity. I mean, I think the disparity is going to go the other way in the fall. I think traditionals or modified ahead of the game in terms of classroom instruction if we're able to open up again in August and then have some closure in October or whenever. And how do we adjust that? And I'm not faulting anyone here, but I think the emphasis has probably been on just how do we get enough together to try and get them to be fall ready. I mean, I think the teachers and Mr. Heller and Mr. Nesbitt and everyone have been doing the best they can. And it's a task there's no way to do a perfect job on. But where are we going to go in the future? And I just don't know. I'm going to probably punt my vote on these.
Chairman Klopfenstein. Chairman Klopfenstein.
Clerk Newbold.
I would like to maybe suggest that I feel uncomfortable that we're talking about voting before we vote. I don't know if I'm stating that wrong, but I feel like we should ask trustees' votes when it comes to the vote.
Well, what I'm trying to understand is do we delay this? I mean, we do have a board meeting on Friday. Possibly we can adjust that if there needs to be more time for consideration. My concern is that, that I'm not hearing anything specific. That's what my concern is. So.
And our next meeting is May 19th, our special meeting, just to clarify.
You have May 14th or May 15th actually on the agenda.
Oh, it should have been May 19th.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
We can definitely refer. Dr.
Well, Chairman Klopfenstein, trustees, the Clerk Newbold is making a good point that we're still in the discussion section of the agenda. And when the board gets to the action section of the agenda and makes a motion, and based on the motion, then there would be discussion to either support or not support the recommendation. So I think that's, Chairman, what Clerk Newbold was trying to point out was that during the discussion agenda, it's just discussion, but it would be in the action part of the agenda where trustees, based on a motion, would give their opinions.
I understand. Thank you very much. I think it's probably wise for us to move forward. Being that we're kind of, I mean, obviously I'm not sure we could even come to a consensus tonight, but at least we did have a very spirited discussion, and that was good. And possibly during the action portion, we can continue that. So I agree.
Well,
I was just wanting to make sure that.
And Chairman Klopfenstein, just for the future discussion on behalf of the trustees, is anytime you have different calendars, and these are certainly examples of a very different kind of calendar, where the modified calendar goes so many days and then they're on break for 3 weeks, and then they go so many days, and then they're on break for 3 weeks. And that's very different than the traditional calendar that goes all year, with the exception of the holiday breaks. So regardless of what happens next year, as Trustee Smiley pointed out, as long as we embrace the idea of a modified calendar, I'm pretty sure that we will have other times when the days and the hours don't match exactly. The next time it could be a discrepancy with the traditional calendar. I think if we go back and analyze day for day and hour for hour, you'll see that the modified calendar, that they were three days of in-class instruction behind the traditional when we did close the school. So what I'm suggesting in terms of Dr. Neuhoff's point about our philosophical stance on this is because there's such a difference in the way the calendars are set up, the flexibility, I guess that's the district has always afforded some flexibility. With the situation this year, that it certainly has pushed that even more so. But again, overall, what we're asking the board to do is to approve the calendar where we've identified the days we were in school, the days that we were closed, the remote learning days that we've put in for both of the calendars, and the waiver that we're going to request from the State Department of Education. That's the request. So, I mean, that might be a discussion down the road if the board wants to take a look philosophically at modified calendars versus traditional calendars. That might be another discussion. But for tonight, we're just trying to go through a compliance issue that will help us move forward.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Dr. Reynolds. And I would like to kind of move this forward. And I apologize, I actually kind of looking over the calendar. Clerk-Newbold was correct. The next meeting is on Tuesday the 19th. So my apologies about that. But I would like to move forward just to make sure we're, yeah. And anytime Clerk-Newbold gives me the red flag, I definitely want to listen. Very good advisor. So
Chairman
we're going to move. Trustee Ozuna.
And I'm sorry to interrupt, but if we are moving this to take a vote later tonight, can I ask one clarifying question?
Please.
When we were having, I believe it was Trustee Johnson that brought up how difficult this is for some of our families and whether or not we could look at an optional situation for that last week. You know, I understand that if we have children that have got to the end of what they can do with the remote learning, that it's difficult to maybe continue to go on for another week. And I know it's not an option for this to be truly optional, but I just wanted to clarify, right now it's up to the parents to pick up the packet or download the material from the remote learning website. Is that correct?
That is correct, Trustee Ozuna.
Okay, thank you.
And sorry, Chairman Klopfenstein, Dr. Reynolds, this is Mr. Heller again. If I could just add one thing. As we've been in this conversation, I have heard from a couple folks from the traditional schools, and they do believe that, they feel that they were about a week behind instructionally prior to the remote learning, just based on where they were in their instructional calendar. So those additional days that those days that they already had scheduled through the end of their calendar, they do feel like those make sense in terms of where they are instructionally.
Mr. Chairman, can I just clarify, Mr. Heller, was that modified? You heard from the modified folks or the traditional?
Sorry,
folks?
yes, modified folks.
Okay.
Thank you.
Are there any other clarifying questions? Hearing none, then let's move forward. And I appreciate everyone's conversation on this. And we'll definitely talk again here in just a few minutes. So moving forward to item number 8, that's the COVID-19 update. I'm assuming Dr. Reynolds, you'll be leading this?
I did not know that, Chairman Klopfenstein. Another surprise for tonight.
Well, actually, I think Mr. Gillen did have a report for this evening under this heading.
Yeah,
so maybe we could lead with him.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, Chairman, the reason we put this under discussion was because when you and Clerk Newbold and I talked, having the update on where we are with COVID-19 it didn't work well when we did it under the board reports or superintendent's report, because it really didn't allow for discussion. So we'd be happy to update you. I sent the minutes from our COVID task force meeting this morning, where each department reported out on what they're doing and where we are and where we're headed. If you would like for Mr. Nesbitt to give you a quick update on the committee that's working for the preparations of the fall, we could certainly do that. And of course, if Jonathan has a report, this would be a good time for that as well.
My understanding was that anyone who had information to share with the board or the public, this would be a good time to do it. If no one did have that sort of report, that's fine. We can just open it up then for questions from trustees. Either way is fine with me. I just thought you'd lead. If somebody did have a report, I'm assuming they probably would go to you instead of me. So my apologies, but if you'd like to, so if there is someone who would like to start on the district side, we would love to hear any information you're willing to provide.
Mr. Chairman, this is Mr. Nesbitt.
Mr. Nesbitt, please.
Thank you for this opportunity, Mr. Chairman and trustees and Dr. Reynolds. We have our fall learning committee that our team. It's a fairly large team, and I believe you know that there are 9 groups within that team. The large team did meet today again, and we went through reports from each one of the groups. We're getting very close to having a draft plan for fall that we can submit to Central District Health and to the board first, of course. But tomorrow, as part of that process, we are meeting with what we call our leadership team, which is all the administrators, lots of support staff from the DSC. There's about 250 people in that group that when we have a leadership meeting that attend that meeting. So we'll be presenting Mr. Heller and I will be presenting a PowerPoint presentation. It's 37 slides. It has a lot of information on it. We have a process for everyone that's in the meeting to give us feedback on questions that we forgot, things that we did not address, solutions or better solutions than what we presented to them. And so we're looking forward to that meeting. After that, we'll compile all that information that comes back. We have plans to involve teachers, parents, students through focus groups. So we're looking forward to that. We do have a survey that we have planned that will go out basically to all district patrons on the possible scenarios that could happen in the fall and what our response to each one of those scenarios will be. Of course, a lot of our conversation right now, especially in the group that I am in, deals with budget and you know, how we can get to the 1-to-1 device to student ratio that we need to be at, so that in the fall, if school is closed in a certain building on Tuesday, that we can have a pretty good product ready to go for students on Wednesday. So those are some of the big discussions that we're having, as well as the minute discussions, details and logistics of things that need to happen. So those meetings normally go about 2 hours. There's a ton of information in those, and I know we do try to get those to you through the weekly dialogue, and I know Dr. Reynolds sends you the minutes from the COVID meeting. So with that, I would answer any questions that I could, or maybe Jonathan would like to speak to questions that were brought up last week.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Yeah, before we go into questions, Jonathan, do you have some you'd like to share, or are there any other administrators who would like to share information from the district?
Chairman and trustees, thank you. I don't have a specific report necessarily prepared at this time, so I can just be available to answer any questions you have. If you do have questions concerning budget, the plan is over the next couple of weeks is to prep kind of a budget update for you guys. That'll happen at the May 26th board meeting in preparation for our June 9th budget hearing. And with that, I can be available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Trustees, maybe just open it up to you. Do you have any specific questions? One thing that would be kind of on my mind would be negotiations, and just to see how I'm hearing a lot of in the news, obviously, a lot of budget issues, and maybe this goes back to you know, the funding cuts and such. And I'm concerned if you know, what our timing is for that, if anything has changed. I know we had a discussion about that at the last meeting. Maybe if anything's changed since then.
Chairman Klopfenstein.
Please.
Chairman, trustees, we are, Jonathan and I have a meeting with the association this week to discuss the budget cuts that we're expecting for next year, and where we look at and try to get an, you know, kind of an understanding of where we head. We would like to, the association has requested that we would like to start soon, and then, but I would say that we'll probably end up with some sort of agreements on some what ifs that happen, where we would agree to come back to the table if certain events occur. But I do know that there are a couple of districts that have started the process. It's still, you know, there's a lot of unknowns out there, but I think based on the governor's memo that came out last Friday and where we think we are, we can have a better discussion than what I reported last week, and start the process.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Trustees, do you have any questions concerning COVID updates, or any concerns, or just overall comments?
Mr. Chairman, I just have one comment. I really appreciated getting that update that we received and reading that. It helped a lot.
Thank you, Trustee Smith.
This is Trustee Ozuna.
Trustee Ozuna?
I was curious if anybody has any idea what the numbers look like week to week as far as packet pickup, or the number of hits that we have on the remote learning website, or maybe as reported by the teachers of the schools of how many students are checking in. But do we have any idea what percent of our kids are staying engaged, and is that percentage remaining steady week after week?
Mr. Chairman, this is Mr. Nesbitt.
Mr. Nesbitt, please.
I'm waiting for a document to open that I received from Joe Kelly. As soon as it opens, I can talk about the hits on the website. We do, yeah, here we go. You know, obviously we had quite an increase. So this current, actually the document I had goes through May 4th. We're still compiling numbers for this last week, but from April 1st through the morning of May 4th, we had 31,775 individual student hits on teams. So of those hits, 19,022 or 60% were from high school grades 9 through 13. 26,990 or 85% of the hits were from grades 6 through 13, so mostly secondary students. So 15,840 or 50% of the site visits do not reflect any of the activities of record like chats, messages, etc. So we're assuming those students are simply picking up assignments. We're trying to match, you know, like we went through and we tried to decipher how many of those hits were from the same student. And so we ran a program that Joe has with student IDs, and we were surprised. We thought maybe that a lot of those 31,775 hits on teams could have been multiple hits from the same student, and we found that the majority were from specific individual students and not multiple hits from the same student. So we're still trying to get, you know, each week we put together those numbers and try to get an idea of where we are with that. So that gives you an idea. You know, as far as accurate data, it's probably as accurate as we can get, but the confidence level in it it's not at the level that I would like to report. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, it does. Thanks. Another question that I have for you is when you're looking at kind of fall ready and what fall looks like if we have to do this or if we end up in this blended learning situation, is there anybody that's diving in subject specific? Because like at my own household, for example, some subjects we've been pretty successful with at home and others are a real struggle. And I'm sure I'm not alone that, you know, high school math without a textbook it's a challenge. And I'm sure there are other situations like that, but are we diving in deeper in some of those pain points to develop a plan around that?
That is part of the curriculum. You know, we're getting to that point. I will say that's on the agenda for the curriculum team. The curriculum team was added to this larger team this week only for the first time, and that's because so much of the stuff that we've been dealing with really had nothing to do with curriculum. You know, it's what path were we going to take and how, you know, what did the budget look like? And we've been having those discussions about that, about if we are going to get devices, what do the devices look like? What are our protocols when we come, you know, for opening and reclosing, things like that. So really the first time that we've had a chance to really dig into, okay, what is the content going to look like when we're remote? It has been this week. So that's something we can certainly put on our radar for content specific. And I know Chris Stoker has been thinking through some of those things also.
Great, thank you, Mr. Nesbitt.
Mr. Chairman, this is Trustee Johnson. Thank you. I have a question, Don. The statistics you gave, and if they're not there, it's okay. It's just more of an understanding question, but we're from Teams, but elementary is not using Teams. Do we have, were you able to have some website hits too around remote learning or packet pickup data, or are we still trying to kind of gather in that?
No, I was trying to open, we have a spreadsheet that we're entering the packet pickup, and I just have to apologize. It's been running since I started talking. And if it comes open, I can get those numbers for you as far as packet pickup that we have. And yes, it's true. As you can see, like the majority of the hits were from middle and high school, of course, where we have devices, and a much smaller number of hits from elementary.
Okay. The other question I have, and I guess there's kind of two. So we've got this target of fall ready, and I know you're working on all this. And I've been thinking about it just from my own household standpoint. Like right now, I couldn't tell you whether my kids have picked up what they are supposed to be picking up or not. And so, and if we're not in a situation where we're back in the buildings in August and September, how are we going to know? Like, how are we going to assess this stuff so we know where kids are at?
We do have some fall ready assessments, that we've developed. And that works. It works much better at the secondary level. Elementary, usually a good elementary teacher will take a couple weeks, and they go through each one of the content areas, and I mean, this is something that happens every single year. They identify where their students are achievement wise. It's something that we've been talking about. And I wish I had a good answer for you at this point for elementary, because it's difficult unless a parent really is trained, to really identify where a student is. We just don't have. They're experts in other things, that they do for their work, and it's difficult. So to answer that question, for instance, if we're still in a soft closure state in August, we're still working on that, and we could provide some things for parents to see where they are. If we're in able to be in a one-to-one situation, then there are things we can actually send home that can come back to the teacher that will give the teacher some pretty good insight. But it still won't be the same as being face-to-face.
Okay.
And that's something we just kind of have to live with at this point, that face-to-face instruction is the best way to go with a great teacher, and and then we'll do the best from there.
Okay. Thank you. I guess I'm really happy that we got high school and middle school set up. Probably mostly worried at this point because I think we do have a longer runway with elementary school students, right? We have a longer time to make it back up over their life or their educational career. But we also, these are the foundational years. And a lot of the research says that they're in their foundational years, how well we can get their reading and their math foundations built changes, and it has I've seen statistics somewhere around 40% return on investment when you can get that good foundational education. And so I know everybody's doing as much and as best as they can. I'm just really concerned about that. I don't know what the answer is. I'm concerned that the longer this goes on, the more chance we have of losing elementary.
Mr. Chairman, the trustees, we have the same concerns. We know the research very well. I could quote you some probably even scarier research. If a student's not reading on grade level by first grade, and certainly by third grade, you know, and even our own data shows that we've seen that in our own data. So, yeah, I'm concerned about that, and I know we all are, and we're searching for the best answers. And you know, we have each other. You know, we're looking at what other districts are doing, what other states are doing, what other countries are doing. I did quite a bit of reading recently on China, Denmark, and Israel. There were some of the leaders in this, and they're trying to figure. The more you get into it, they're asking the same questions we are. And yeah, we're concerned when we're not face to face in a classroom with a good teacher. And you know, and then how can we? What's our next best options? And I don't know that we have secondary figured out, as you put it there. I didn't want to mean to say that. Yeah,
Sorry,
solid.
let me clarify.
We're solid in secondary. Yeah, I didn't mean that. But we are in a better situation in secondary than we are in say kindergarten, especially through second grade. You know, high school student can do a lot more on their own than a kindergartner can. So, yeah, we're going to do our best to work through this, and we're going to try to ask lots of questions. This week, Mr. Heller and I did meet with over 15 teachers, and we talked about how things is going, and they were from all levels. And the secondary was much more positive than what we heard from the elementary. And so, you know, we were asking what could we do to help mitigate the situation, and they gave us some good ideas. And so we're going to keep asking those questions, and we're going to keep talking with our people and with our parents. And we all know that this is not a good place to be. It's just, what do we do while we're here? So that's a lot of our discussions right now.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Other trustees, do you have any other thing? Just realizing the time, we're getting close to 9, so I was curious if you had any final questions for staff, just to clarify about what's going on under COVID.
Mr. Chairman, this is Trustee Newhoff.
Trustee Newhoff, please.
Yeah, so sometimes times of crisis and challenge lead us to good things, and I think we're getting there in many ways. I mean, we had no idea how big the digital divide was in our district, for instance. And I think another way that this is going to benefit us in the long run is in the flexibility that I think I heard Mr. Nesbitt speak to concerning, you know, if we have to toggle back and forth between in-class instruction and you know, some sort of remote learning situation like we're doing now, is that, and I don't want a, you know, gory detail thing, but I mean, is that fundamentally changing the way we're planning instruction in the fall? I mean, are we doing, you know, basically going to have remote learning option that, you know, as Mr. Nesbitt suggested, we may have to turn on a dime and go to that goes to it. And I'm kind of saying and thinking about situations where hopefully we're beyond this and you have a kid who can't be in class. And is that some, you know, and can we have some sort of option there that's sort of built into the way that we prepare our classroom instruction to be able to address situations like this for a whole class or for an individual student? I mean, are teachers being asked to gear up and have a packet ready in addition to what they're going to do in a classroom?
Mr. Chairman, trustees, we are having those conversations, and you know, one of the slides that we'll talk about tomorrow will be the opportunities that have been presented to us because of having to go through this. And so I don't think education will ever be the same. There's a lot of writing right now that you can read about how things will be different. And absolutely, I think that there are teachers that are using Teams right now because they had to, and are becoming proficient at Teams that have never used it before, and are using it in some very creative ways. And that absolutely will have impact on students as we move forward in the years from now. And that is, you know, as a student is absent, a student is on a trip, a teacher is gone. You know, there's a high school teacher at Eagle High School that has done some amazing things and was actually showing me some of this a couple years ago. While he was at a conference in Seattle, he was actually meeting with his students at Eagle High School. So there are things like that. There's been pockets of it, and it's going to become much more widespread, and I think will become the norm as opposed to the exception. That's just to name a few things.
Yeah, no, and that's great. And I think, yeah, I mean, we're dealing with a crisis now in terms of, you know, one-to-one and the internet issue. And I think we need to continue to keep that at the forefront of discussion, not just in these board meetings and in the administration, but this is a community issue. And you know, I hope we can continue that. I very much appreciate all the things you guys have been doing. That's all I have. Thank you.
Trustee Smiley, did you have anything you'd like to ask?
Mr. Chairman, I have a couple things, but I'll save that for when I do my report.
Sounds very good. Thank you very much. And Trustee Ozuna, I'm sorry, I just want to make sure I got you.
You did. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Excellent. So we will move forward then out of discussion and into action. And that brings us then to item number 1, which is revised policy 502.5, alcohol, drug, and tobacco. I will stand for a motion. And just to note, if there are revisions that you'd like to hold for, as we discussed, if I could just have whatever is in your motion, a succinct direction for staff, just to make sure they understand what the direction of the board is.
Mr. Chairman, I'll attempt success here. I would move that we hold revised policy 502.5, alcohol, drug, and tobacco until the next meeting, and Clerk Newbold can tell me if it can be on the actual next meeting or has to be regular scheduled, for revisions that update the policy or the philosophy section.
Yeah, I think it would be the next regular. I'm not sure if I can make it. Yes, exactly.
Okay.
So it would be
okay. To clarify, then the next regularly scheduled meeting.
There we go.
Yeah. Okay.
Awesome. Okay, so we have a motion on the floor. There is a second.
This is Trustee Ozuna with a second.
Thank you very much for the second, Trustee Ozuna. Is there any discussion?
Mr. Chairman, I'll just say I'm willing to revise it, but my personal feeling is I'm happy with what we have. But if the other trustees would be happier if we could make some adjustments, that's okay.
Thank you very much for that comment.
Chairman Klopfenstein, this is Mary Ann. That would be so helpful for us if either Trustee Johnson or someone could edit and revise the wording so that we're not guessing at what would be best. So if we could be provided with that, we'd be happy to put it into the policy.
Thank you.
So you're saying basically, I just want to make sure I'm clear. So you're asking to make sure after the meeting that Trustee Johnson would forward you her thoughts in more specific terms. Is that what you're saying?
That would be wonderful.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. Is that appropriate, Trustee Johnson?
Yes, I absolutely can do that.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Awesome. Is there any other discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 And aye as well, so makes it unanimous. That brings us then to item number 2, calendar for the traditional calendar. We'll stand for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, to get the conversation started, I would move that we accept the revised calendar for the 2019-2020 traditional calendar.
Thank you very much for that motion, Trustee Smiley. Is there a second?
This is Trustee Ozuna, second.
Thank you very much, Trustee Ozuna, for the second. Is there any discussion?
Mr. Chairman, I just have a point of clarification. We've got these agenda items broken all out. Is there an opportunity to, or at least the calendars, to take them as a package, or do we need to do them as a single action? I know we have a motion on the table that does it as a single, but I just wanted to clarify first.
Yeah, I think we should take them as individual items.
Okay, thank you.
No, thank you. Is there any other discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 And Chairman is aye as well. Any nays? Any abstentions?
Trustee Newhoff abstains.
Trustee Johnson as well.
So we have 3 yeses and 2 abstentions for the record. That brings us into item number 3, and it passes. Item number 3 be revised calendar for the modified 2019-2020. Is there a motion?
Mr. Chairman, same motion. I move that we approve the revised calendar for the 2019-2020 modified calendar.
Thank you very much for that motion, Trustee Smiley. Is there a second?
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Please, Trustee Ozuna.
Is there time for this one to come back at our next regularly scheduled meeting for additional conversation? Or is this time sensitive?
Dr. Reynolds, I'll lean on you for that.
Chairman Klopfenstein, we're trying to coordinate the submission of the waiver with the IC report that's due to the state on the 15th.
Thank you very much for that. So I would assume, yes, it's time sensitive.
Can you tell me what the IC report is? Is that the instructional hour report?
I see in there are many reports, Trustee Ozuna. This is just one of them.
So just to clarify, the instructional hours are required to be submitted by the 15th?
That's my understanding. I hope I'm not wrong. Mr. Yoakum?
Dr. Reynolds, Mr. Chairman, Trustee Zuna, I would defer to Jonathan when it comes to IC. He's the resident expert. I believe IC is our is our ADA submission for funding is the big part of what IC does. I don't know that we have a deadline to submit these instructional hour waivers. I'm looking at the website right now and I don't see anything. I just know that we have to do it, and the end of the school year is approaching. I would also add that on May 26th, the board will have, before it changes to the 2021 calendar and instructional hours as well. And that one is due by the end of the month for 2021.
Thank you, Mr. Yoakum.
So we still have a motion on the floor, waiting for a second. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you very much, Trustee Ozuna, for that second. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Trustee Smiley for the aye?
Yes.
Trustee Ozuna? Thank you very much. Trustee
I was
Ozuna?
an aye as well.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry. That's 2 ayes. Chairman would be aye as well. So Trustee Newhoff?
No. I'm
No, okay.
abstaining.
Thank you very much. And Trustee John, I'm just going to go through a roll call. And Trustee Johnson?
Yeah, abstain as well.
Yeah, abstain as well. Thank you very much. So that brings 3 yeses and 2 abstentions. Means it passes. So item number 4, recommendation to adjust instructional hours. Do we have a motion for this item?
Mr. Chairman.
I'm hearing 2 people.
Go ahead, Trustee Ozuna. Go ahead.
I'll lean over. Yeah.
I would
Trustee Ozuna.
move that we approve the adjustment to the instructional hours for the traditional 1920 school year.
I
Thank you
second.
very much for that motion. Trustee Smiley with the second, Trustee Ozuna with the motion. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 I heard you both that time. Trustee Newhoff with the aye as well. Did I hear that?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you very much. Okay. Any other ayes?
Yeah, sorry, Trustee Johnson with the aye.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Chairman as well, so that makes it unanimous. That brings us to item number 5, recommendation to adjust instructional hours for the modified for the school year. Do we have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I would move to adjust instructional hours for the modified 2019 or 2020 school year.
Thank you very much, Trustee Smiley, for that motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Trustee Ozuna with the second. Thank you very much. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 So I hear 2 ayes. Is that correct? Okay. So Chairman would be aye as well. Is there any noes? Is there any abstentions?
Trustee Newhoff.
Trustee Johnson.
Trustee Newhoff. Trustee Newhoff with the abstention, and Trustee Johnson with the abstention. So we have 3 yeses and 2 abstentions. So the item passes. That brings us into section F with the board reports. And I will start with Trustee Newhoff, if you would.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just going to give some positive news. We are all full of things that are unfortunate, but the foundation and most importantly, its donors have been doing incredible things to help out people during our times. And this year, our funded grants through the foundation and things the foundation has facilitated are $859,028, which is pretty spectacular. And the revenue for the foundation this year is almost $900,000. It's $899,253. So it was a great year for the foundation, and they continue to do great things to support the district. That's all I have.
Thank you very much, Trustee Newhoff. That is very good news. Trustee Johnson, make you next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would start it off with something kind of light. I think May is my birthday month, and if I could have, when you wish you blow out your candles, you always have to do a birthday wish, which we still do at my house. I wish for COVID to go away. So I think everybody's at the spot where we just would like to be done. I have a couple things that have came up in the last couple weeks I just want to report on for awareness. I've had a number of phone calls, fielding a couple, even an hour-long one last night, around where we are going with the growth in South Meridian. And I think if I had represented another area, we probably would have got a North Meridian too. But so I'm glad I think we're going to have something around kind of what our strategy is adjusting there for the future in June. But I continue to field quite a few phone calls on that. The other topic I want to just bring up for awareness is that, and I think Mr. Chairman, you and the good Trustee Smiley looped me in, that we had some concerns, actually came from a community member in South Meridian, but it was around the development application and approval with the City Council and of Meridian, and how that was impacting the growth in West Ada. And I think, just for awareness, there's been some conversations, Mr. Chairman, you and Representative or Trustee Smiley are in them, and I've been in some as well, just trying to figure out how we create a systematic way to figure out the funnel of growth and how we move that and manage the infrastructure around that growth, schools being one of them. So I would put on the record that I've been really appreciative. I've had a couple phone calls from City Council members, and what I'm appreciative of them most is that their focus is on community and kids. And so anytime we have somebody who isn't voted into office for specifically, or I shouldn't say it this way, but anytime we have somebody who takes on our mantra of our imperative of doing the best in education for kids, even though that's not part of their public official role, I'm really appreciative. And so I guess I would just put that out there, that I really appreciate that partnership and those folks taking the time to think about how they impact us.
Thank you very much. Trustee Ozuna?
I don't have a report tonight, but I appreciate the great in-depth conversation that we've had this evening.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that as well. Trustee Smiley.
Excuse me. Excuse me, now I'm on. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I've been, my wife and I have taken it upon ourselves that we belong to this Facebook group called Quarantine Walking. And we have made it a point every single day that we're going to go out to one of our elementary attendance areas and make a nice long walk. And it has been really eye-opening because, you plot these schools on a map, but you actually go out and you walk some of the attendance zones, and you're discovering that this is a real challenge. And I especially have noted when we get out into the south part of the district that we have a lot of real problems physically in meeting the needs of what our district is going to be, especially at the elementary level. We've been able to buy a little bit of time with the opening of Oahe, Pleasant Valley, and the addition of additional classrooms at Mountain View. That's going to buy us a little bit of time. But with our elementary south of the freeway, it's absolutely there is going to have to be something done at the elementary. And I think the report that we had earlier from Mr. Nesbitt about how many hits. I'm actually very impressed by that, because we have really focused on making sure that our high school students are able to access a laptop or other learning device, and the number of hits in the secondary level reflect that. And I actually think that's really, really good. And it shows that our efforts to make sure, especially with our high school kids, that we get them something that they can access, that's pretty good. It's not going to be perfect. This is all uncharted territory, and I can say, working at the university level, I've had the advantage of being able to do a blended approach to where some of our learning is online and some of it is face-to-face, and that's still the most effective way to do it. But in dealing with this crisis the way we have, I have to praise the district. I think that we've had all hands on deck, and the results are showing. I think that's actually a good sign. The other thing I've been able to do is I've been able to go around to some of the schools and look at the lunch distribution, and I have been so heartwarmed. I know I was over at, I believe, Heritage, and the line went clear out onto the road. And they were distributing that stuff around the back of Heritage. So the response is absolutely amazing. We are meeting the needs of children all over this district, and that's something that I think is really an above and beyond for a lot of our staff and a lot of our personnel. And I just have to pass along the people that I met that were doing that. They were positive. They, thumbs up, smiles, whatever. I was very, very impressed with that. And also, a lot of the attendance zones, and this is one of the things that we're going to emphasize with our meeting with the mayor. Just because there's a number on a piece of paper, that doesn't mean that we can just automatically redraw the map. There's a lot more to it than that. And I think this is something I'm very much looking forward to, because my mantra has always been, we're all supposed to be on the same team. And this is about children. This is about learning. And we have been faced with crises that none of us have ever seen before. And I have to just give the highest praise I can to our people, our administration, our teachers, and our parents. I've had a number of conversations with parents as well. And when I explain what's going on, or I respond to them, the one thing they always appreciate the fact that we're here, that we're listening. And I have to say, we're going to get through this, and we will come out of this stronger. We will come out of this better. I'm feeling very positive, and we're going to make it.
Thank you very much for that. I truly appreciate that. I think your positivity is definitely infectious, and I totally agree with you. I think our district is definitely, the staff, the administration. I know you're in here all the time, so you're doing a very good job as far as I'm concerned. One thing I have been doing is, like Trustee Smiley, is just kind of going around and looking at the food lines and just curious, and it's shocking, the demand. I mean, we are 2 months into this, and I would happen to be over at the DSC today by Renaissance, and there were cars going through, and they were pushing them through, and they were smiling, and they were joking, and it was wonderful. And I so appreciate what their food folks are doing, and what the district is doing to help kids on the front lines. We are going to have, Trustee Smiley and I will be having a meeting with the mayor on Friday, and we hope to talk about many different issues, but definitely how we communicate what some of the issues that the district is having, and if you'd like to share anything with us that you'd like us to share with the mayor, I'd love to do that. He is a wonderful partner with the district, and it's such a pleasure to be able to have a line of communication with him and be able to talk to him about issues. And also very looking forward to graduation coming up early June. I was invited by Meridian High to sit for their graduation ceremony. which should be amazing. I'm quite looking forward to it. I think it's going to be better than what people think. And it's definitely going to be a celebration of kids. And I understand that Trustee Johnson and Trustee Newhoff, I believe you both already have scheduled for one for Eagle High School and the other one for Mountain View. And I don't know if Trustee Smalley and Trustee Ozuna, if you're scheduled to go to the other high schools, but if not, excellent. Okay. Trustee Ozuna, are you able to?
I'm going to be at Centennial.
Wonderful, wonderful. Very good news. And I'm not sure if
I'll be
Trustee Ozuna,
available
if you
as
can.
well. I'll reach out to Rocky.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think it's wonderful for us to be able to support our kids during their last mile. So truly appreciate, and I just want to make sure I also, besides saying how much I appreciate Dr. Reynolds and the administration and the teachers of this district, but also really want to say how much I truly appreciate my fellow trustees. I know some of these discussions are hard and maybe a little uncomfortable at times, but I truly appreciate the thoughts you're putting together. You care about the kids, and it shows. So anyway, thank you very much. Dr. Reynolds, you're up.
Thank you, Chairman Klopfenstein, trustees. 3 things. One, our supplemental levy election is on Tuesday, and if you could do anything to help remind family and friends to get their absentee ballot in, the sooner the better. We're just very anxious in terms of getting the information out. I think the presentation Jonathan made tonight certainly is a positive as it relates to information that could be shared regarding the levy, but anything and everything we can all do to make sure that we're successful in that would be wonderful, to have as many questions answered as we possibly can and make sure that our patrons understand and feel confident in what we're trying to do. The second item, over the course of several months, off and on, the board has either collectively or individually mentioned a desire for training, and we actually were working on setting that up, and then the virus hit us all and we weren't allowed to get together to have that training. But I wanted just to run this by the board again. The gentleman we had lined up to do the training has since retired, and so I was given the name of another individual who has been working with trustees and has recently retired from his law practice, and he's been working with trustees around northern Idaho for the past 40 years, and said that he would be happy to come down and provide training to the board. And we were thinking we would do it in conjunction with the board advance in June, and hopefully by then all the restrictions will be lifted and at least 10 of us could be in a room. And so what I was wondering, A, do you still want us to pursue that? And B, if you're interested in that as being part of your advance, it would be really helpful if you could email me what you would like to have in terms of training on that day. Would you like, as a board, to have a review of roles and responsibilities of the board, effective meetings, open public meeting law, what it takes to be a great board? So any of those topics, if you're interested in pursuing that, maybe you could let me know, and Sherry and I could keep working on it. And then if you have any specifics that you would like to have, and Chairman Klopfenstein, maybe this should be a discussion item on one of our next board meetings that's coming up very soon. And then the third topic I wanted to run by you in our planning stages for next fall. We certainly have this robust team of people working on all the logistics and the details. Eric has created a survey that we want to send out to parents and get feedback on what has worked and what hasn't worked, and how we can better support our families, our parents and guardians and relatives who are working with the kids at home. And then we would like to reach out to and create focus groups. And I'm not sure if we'll be able to do that in person or if we'll have to do that remotely, but we would like to organize 7 focus groups of 5 to 7 individuals representing certificated staff, classified staff, administrators, students, parents, our business patrons, and elected officials. And just go through a process very similar to what Chairman Kloppenstein led us through in our last advance, in terms of it's a pared down version of strategic planning, but beginning with our vision for the West Ada School District around career and college success, and talking about where we are, what's our current reality, even with the virus, what's our current reality, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and then to ask these focus groups, what do you see as our strengths? What do you see as our weaknesses? What do you see as our opportunities? What do you see as our threats? And we could compile that information and share it with Don's team before we finalize any kind of plans for next year. So those are the 3 things I wanted to run by the board.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. That brings us into item 3, I guess, the adjournment. Do I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, so move to adjourn.
Trustee Smiley, thank you very much for that motion. Is there a second? Do you need a table?
Oh, I didn't hit the unmute. Sorry. This is a second, Trustee Johnson. So.
Thank you very much for that second.
We'll stay all night.
Appreciate that. Stay all night. Me too. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 And Chairman is aye as well. Thank you very much for a great meeting. That's unanimous. And have a great evening. Thank you. Bye-bye.